Chapter 141 Reunion. Dragon Cloud City, Armor District, Alley. Don't you at least have the intention to explain yourself? Bathed in the light of the setting sun, Cohen's breathing quickened, his grip on his sword hilt tightened. Raphael stood before him dressed in white, and gave him a light smile. For old time's sake, Cohen, leave this city immediately, a word of advice from one old comrade to another. Cohen sucked in a deep breath, suppressing his anger and curiosity. At this moment, he did not even know what to say or how to face his old friend from the Tower of Eradication. Miranda is here, she's nearby. Cohen was adjusting his breath, trying to appear calm. Did you know that? Never mind, the city gate should be closed by now. Raphael entirely ignored what he said, looked up at the dimming sky, and sighed. Both of you should find a place to hide. Do not come out at night no matter what happens. When the sun rises the next dawn, leave the city. The sooner the better. She doesn't know yet. Cohen lowered his head, his face was enveloped in shadows. Miranda still doesn't know about you. Whatever happened to you, the tower sent us to. Raphael slipped his sword into its sheath. Whatever you came here for, just forget about it. It's going to be a rough couple of days for you too. In fact, you shouldn't even be here. Goddammit, Raphael Lindbergh. Cohen could not stand it anymore. He raised his head, his whole face indignant as he roared, keep your smartass attitude to yourself. Don't you get it? We came for the disaster sword. Raphael's gaze sharpened. I met a disaster swordsman in Red Street Market and experienced his power. I have also seen what your power could do back in the Hall of Stars, Cohen growled, clenching his teeth. Do you know what the tower ordered us to do with the disaster swordsmen? Investigate them thoroughly, trace their roots. No live captives allowed, kill on sight. You really don't plan to explain yourself? Raphael stared at him with a cryptic expression for a few seconds. Eventually, he let out a chuckle, and looked at Cohen with amusement. So, you suspect that I've joined Disaster Sword? Are you going to arrest me? Or kill me right here? The two men glared at each other for a while, until Cohen lifted his fist and waved it indignantly. No, Cohen panted heavily, looking down again. I don't care about Disaster Sword, or the century-old blood feud between us and them. The police officer bowed down, picked up his sheath from the ground, and put away his saber. He stammered, but I care about my friends, I want to know what happened to you. I want to help. Raphael gazed at him and gave a light-hearted laugh. You haven't changed a bit, Cohen. Tell me what happened from the beginning to the end. Everything that happened in the past 3 years, your interaction with Disaster Sword, how you got into the Black Prophet's secret intelligence department. Tell me everything. Cohen heaved a sigh and took a step forward. Whatever it is, we can figure this out together. Everyone at the inner tower, like Master Shower Zedai, they don't know that you. As for Miranda, if it's for her sake, I can keep it from her as well, he said grimly. Raphael inhaled deeply, clenching his fists. As for Disaster Swordsmen, they are not just the archenemies of the Tower of Eradication. Cohen peered at Raphael. Their intentions are not that simple. They are somehow involved in the attack on the Extit diplomat group, and the assassination attempt on the Prince of Constellation in front of the fortress. The smile on Raphael's face vanished and was replaced with a frown. Cohen sighed, gazing straight into Raphael's eyes. These incidents, I'm not sure whether you know about them, or about the people you are dealing with, but I'm willing to trust you. I believe that you have a reasonable explanation. So, before a horrible mistake is made, before you reach the point of no return. This is the reason you came to Dragon Cloud City. The young man in white interrupted him. The disaster swordsman plotted 2 consecutive assassinations on 2 princes. Allegedly they are in cahoots with an Archduke of Extit, Cohen said sternly, nodding. So the feud is no longer just between the Tower of Eradication and Disaster Sword, but between Constellation and Extit. It's a matter of war and peace. Why send you? Raphael looked up at him, his gaze as calm as a lake. Why send you two to investigate this? Because we both have experience dealing with disaster swordsmen. Cohen pounded his chest. Because we have been on the battlefield, because we are the seeds. HMPH, seeds. Raphael snorted, shaking his head. I am a seed, too, so is Missadun, Croce, and Eklund from Olumbia, Edgar and Beckham from Eastern Peninsular. Why didn't they send us? Why send you 2 aristocrats of all people? Speaking of which, gosh, I thought the debate about aristocrats and commoners was settled after the fight between you and Missadun. Cohen sighed. Croce, her right hand was disabled when she was hunting a disaster swordsman. I believe that's one of the reasons why they sent Miranda. The last rays of sunlight shone on Raphael's face. He did not respond but appeared to be in deep thought. At the mention of the tragedy that befell his old comrade, Cohen looked down at his feet. With a heavy heart, he said, yes, the girl who always soldiered on when she was punished to jog with a sword between her teeth, the girl who hoped to be a swordswoman, the girl who was supposed to become the next, Heart of the Rhine, can no longer lift a sword. I don't want to see you end up like that, so let me help you, just like before. Cohen inhaled. He took a huge stride forward and placed his hands on Raphael's shoulders. If you are doing something unforgivable or are currently doing something unforgivable, let me be your accomplice. Whatever it is, we can resolve it. You are not alone. Raphael remained silent for 2 seconds. Then, his expression changed. You need to get out of here, now. Either climb through the city wall or dig a tunnel. A smile crept back onto Raphael's face. His gaze became cold. Something is off, and it's not something you can deal with. Raphael shrugged, but found that he could not free himself from the police officer's arms. You know me, Raphael. Cohen lowered his head. He spoke with much difficulty. If you refuse to explain yourself. The police officer lifted his head, and his gaze was determined. Then you're not going anywhere. Cohen was much taller than Raphael, but the young man in white robes did not lift his chin. Instead, his gaze shifted upwards to meet his, which made it seem gloomier. Last warning, Cohen Carabayan, future Count of Walla Hill. Contrary to his gaze and tone of voice, Raphael's smile was bright and gleeful. Some things are not what they used to be. Leave it, especially regarding matters involving the secret intelligence. His arms shot out swiftly and clutched Cohen's arms, which held on to his shoulders tightly. Dong, a loud sound of collision. The two men jolted, but they did not separate. Cohen still kept a tight grip over Raphael. He did not let go. Really, Officer Carabayan, Raphael felt the growing pressure exerted from Cohen's hands. His voice was grim. You think I was joking about eliminating you? Cohen's face darkened. You behaved like this back in the Hall of Stars, and now in Dragon Cloud City. Cohen clenched his teeth and tightened his grip on Raphael's shoulders, just randomly popping up with a cryptic expression, telling me to leave it. Becoming a disaster swordsman, joining the secret intelligence, have these things really changed you completely? The police officer was getting more and more frustrated. You can't even give a simple explanation to me, your old friend. In the alley, the two men's bare-handed contest of strength became increasingly terrifying as they exerted more pressure on each other's arms. Like you said, we are old friends. With his smile still intact, he narrowed his eyes and said cheerfully, we each merely chose a different path. Looking at Raphael, a wave of dejection he could not put into words washed over Cohen. What on earth turned my dear friend into this? Cohen's breathing became heavy. If it's because something bad had happened to you, I never experienced what you yourself have, I might not fully understand how you must feel. But if you are willing to confide in me, we can still. Raphael shouted coldly, Cohen Carabayan, future Count of Walla Hill, do I look like I have been through something bad? Not at all, said a strange yet familiar female voice. The two men were startled. Cohen turned his head. Raphael smiled a perfect smile. The two of them were staring at a pretty silhouette under the moonlight which had risen at some unknown period of time. The head of the 8 seeds of the Tower of Eradication, Miranda Arund, sauntered into the alleyway under the silver moonlight. A sword in hand, she gazed at the two hugging men with a frosty look. Is there anything you would like to explain? Explain, Cohen thought. He turned his head and looked at Raphael, who stood only inches from him. Only then did he realize that the pose he shared with Raphael. The police officer let go of Raphael's shoulders abruptly, and shoved him away. Miranda, let me explain. Cohen forced an embarrassed grin, scratching his head. Don't be mad, we're not. Miranda cut him off coldly. Shut up, Cohen. The face of the swordswoman of the Arund family was frigid. I was not asking you. Both Cohen's expression and words froze. Miranda stared at the young man in white, the man who had vanished for 3 years. Being on the receiving end of Miranda's death glare, Raphael lowered his head and gave a laugh. It has been a long time, Mira. The young man in white shook his head slowly. You are cold as usual, so cold it's heartbreaking. At that very moment, Officer Cohen Carabayan, who was scratching his head, suddenly realized that his presence was a little unnecessary. Miranda ambled towards Cohen and stood by his side. Her tone of voice was emotionless, as though this person she was talking to was not her former flame. Mira, stop calling me that, Raphael Lindbergh. Cohen gave a sigh. Hey, he looked at the couple awkwardly, we should find a place to sit down. There are things we need to discuss. Yeah, by the way, Miranda. Cohen winked at Raphael in desperation, hoping the latter would get the hint. You haven't known that Raphael is a high-level operative in the Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department, have you? He was interrupted again, this time, by Raphael. You are not angry. The young man in white ignored Cohen. He looked steadily at Miranda's petite face and said with a smile, that's surprising. You know, I expect you to be a little more agitated. Once again, Cohen felt that his presence was a little unnecessary. And then throw myself into the comfort of your arms, hitting your chest with feeble punches, crying, where have you been? Why didn't you come look for me? Do you know how much I've missed you all these years? And then close my eyes expecting your kisses. Miranda gave a sarcastic laugh. Don't read so many romance novels, it does funny things to your brain. Raphael snorted, you stole my line. Cohen watched his two friends, feeling at a loss as to what to do. He had an awkward expression on his face. Besides, I am not one of those weak useless women, why would I be angry? Miranda flicked the handle of her sword. What right does the man who clearly had the ability to come back but instead left for 3 whole years have for me to be angry at him? She is very angry. From behind Miranda, Cohen signaled Raphael with a gaze. Raphael was still smiling. Miranda looked Raphael in the eyes but failed to find a hint of familiarity in them. It caused her chest to tighten. At last, Raphael raised an eyebrow. "All right," he said slowly and indifferently, "you stop all that you are doing in Dragon Cloud City, lay low, and then leave first thing the next morning. If you agree to do that, I will explain things to you both when this is over. In the meantime, no matter what happens." Cohen scowled. This time it was he who interrupted Raphael. "Hey, Raphael," he uttered brusquely, lifting an index finger. "I swear, if you keep using that tone." Miranda interrupted him again, "That won't be necessary. I wouldn't listen, nor would I believe whatever you have to say." Her expression was blank, her tone mild and emotionless, but Cohen felt a chill slither down his spine. For the third time, he genuinely believed that he should not be here. "Oh," Raphael's lips curved up, then he amusedly said, "What you are going to do then?" Miranda stepped forward, peering at the person she once knew best. Raphael gazed at her calmly. Miranda narrowed her eyes, and with the most indifferent and airy voice she had ever used in her life, she said faintly, "I will first knock your sword off your hand, then beat you to a pulp on the ground." Cohen frowned. "What?" The mistress of a run continued, "Break both of your legs, dislocate your joints, break your nose, knock out your front teeth, stomp on you on the muddy ground. And when you are lying on your stomach, crying, begging for mercy, I will extract the truth out of your mouth, bit by bit." Miranda said her last sentence coolly. There was a momentary silence. "Hiya." Raphael flashed Cohen a bitter smile. He squeezed his eyes shut, sighed, and said, "Looks like she is angry for real." Cohen only felt an incredible headache. Under the moonlight, two figures acted at the same time. Miranda pulled out her sword slowly. Raphael flashed an indifferent smile, and he, too, reached for his sword hilt. Guys, if this is just one of your couple scuffles," Cohen stuck his head out from behind Miranda and began cautiously and awkwardly, "can you maybe do this later?" Right in the next instant, Miranda gave him a fierce rear elbow strike, blood gushed out of his nostrils. Chapter 142 Who's There? 1. Chapman Lampod. In the corridor outside Heroic Spirit Palace's banquet hall, Archduke Olsius muttered this name with a subtle expression, but then he stared at the tiny Thales with a disgusted expression. "Extit's next common elected king," the Archduke sneered. "Brat, I heard that you are a precocious genius," the full-bearded Archduke said coldly. "Very well, you are indeed a little smarter than normal children, but this is what I hate the most." Thales' face froze. "Looks like I left a very horrible first impression. Scaring others with sensational rumors, are you? Dueling with the king, Lampod, what else?" Olsius' gaze was cold, and his tone was fierce. "Being an expert at such things, and at such a young age, you will definitely grow into a poisonous snake full of conspiracies and machinations. Perhaps I should grab my sword and thrust it into your chest today." Olsius spat furiously. "Constellation has already caused us a lot of trouble. We don't need you to add fuel to the fire, little brat from the Empire." **T. Realizing that the negotiation might go awry, Thales felt a clenching in his heart. "Then why did you come to Dragon Cloud City?" Thales quickly thought of things to say for the sake of continuing the conversation so that it would not come to an abrupt end due to Olsius' hatred towards him. "If it is really as you said, that my arrival is trouble, why did you come and associate yourself with this trouble?" Even though Thales appeared calm, he was actually anxious. He raised his head and stared at the ruler of Prestige Orchid region. "Will I succeed? Associate myself with trouble, even though you are troublesome, you are far from fearsome, brat." Olsius sneered. "I'm here to take a look at the game between Constellation and the dragon after 12 years, and see what we can gain from a prince. I'm also here to see if our king is already senile." "So, what is your conclusion?" Thales smilingly said. "Did your king disappoint you?" Olsius forced a smile. However, his fierceness was visible behind his full beard. "You should rejoice. He is still rational and did not get carried away by anger, hence you are safe. That's why you have the chance to spout nonsense here." The Archduke sized the brat up in front of him. "Safe." Thales looked at Olsius' heavy saber and laughed mockingly. "I reckon that the saber on your waist might have a different opinion. It almost had the privilege of becoming the prince's bane." Archduke Olsius turned his head and chuckled. "Stop pretending, kid, you actually know very well that act of forcing you to commit suicide was just a farce." Thales' heart clenched. Despite his majesty's behavior today, he will not declare war easily. Olsius' gaze was sharp. "Because you are protected by your father's pledge, the archdukes will not support him in declaring all-out war. As for his attitude towards you, he was probably acting in front of us." The Archduke of Prestige Orchid snorted softly. He spoke while shaking his head and clicking his tongue. "Testing our loyalty or something. It's an old trick. As for you and him," Olsius stared at Thales with a subtle expression and raised his eyebrows. He flashed a strange smile. "Both of you are actually putting on an act together, aren't you?" At this moment, Thales' expression finally changed. He knows, he's realized it. Thales was really stunned. He insisted on killing you just to see our reaction, right? Archduke Olsius' expression was filled with disdain. For a person whose family is at the brink of destruction, he sure has planned everything carefully. From the moment he entered Dragon Cloud City, the Prince of Constellation was more or less deluded by King Nuven's strong presence, the Archduke's incessant prattling, Nicholas and Shile's joint friend and foe routine, and Poutre who always tried his best to make Thales feel at ease with his relaxed attitude. Besides, the memories from his past life kept flooding back into his mind. This made Thales complacent. He felt that even in this dangerous, dog-eat-dog world, he was probably considered intelligent. This gave him the misconception that the 5 exted archdukes were like 2-dimensional paper dolls that can be folded and crumpled with only slight force, or like mice in a laboratory that would show appropriate reactions with only slight stimulation. However, Thales suddenly realized that the one standing in front of him was a person when the ill-mannered and seemingly crude Archduke Olsius unmasked the trick he set up together with King Nuven in an undisguised manner. A trick that they thought was infallible. He was a live person. Even when it came to a few young children in the abandoned house, he could not get a clear grasp on their actions and their manner of thinking. Let alone an experienced and highly respected Northland noble of such dignified status. He is a powerful man who has ruled comfortably for many years, and his power is comparable to that of the king. He had stood like a giant for many years amid Northland's cold, bitter and cruel wind. How would someone like this be bad at plotting against others and also not be intelligent? Thales lowered his head and gritted his teeth slightly under Olsius' slightly mocking gaze. No, I have not lost yet. He shut his eyes, inhaled deeply, and reopened his eyes. You know him very well, King Nuven. This time, the second Prince of Constellation's tone was not as light as before. Instead, there was a hint of imposingness and steadiness. Olsius' eyes gleamed as he watched Thales rapidly recover from the shock. Yes, I understand him, since the first time my father brought me to Dragon Cloud City to seek an audience with him. However, what I know more is the feeling of being in that position, to control, maintain and protect a family, a city, a territory, a group of subjects, the Archduke said faintly. After the Walton family's tragedy, Nuven has had to tidy up, remedy, and arrange a lot of things. All for the sake of his family's continuation and Dragon Cloud City's future. The declaration of war will only benefit Black Sand region and people like Lampod who might obtain Constellation's territories, resources, and people. King Nuven definitely does not want his enemies to profit. So, you are actually the one who does not want war and has the same interest as him, little brat from the Empire. Smiling, Olsius shook his head. Why would he want to make an enemy of you? No matter what act both of you are putting up, it's nothing more than that. Both of you are on the same side, Walton and Jadastar. The Archduke snorted through his nose. His expression was cold. Thales sighed softly. Yeah, how can someone who became an Archduke dozens of years ago and is still currently in power be an idiot? Naturally, these Archdukes would be able to think of whatever Thales could think of. They would at least have intelligent subordinates. The Archduke of Black Sand had Kentvida. Where did Thales get the confidence to rely on 20-something years of incomplete, so-called transmigrator memories that took place in a totally different era and civilization, and where his social status as well as his identity was completely different from his past life? He thought that he could be just like countless other transmigrators before him, relying on superb interpersonal skills, extraordinary memory, and an ever-present, magnetic aura to force these elites from a different world into submission, manipulating them to his heart's desires. These elites were the survivors and winners of a social competition that was numerous times more intense and crueler than the one in his past life. Even when facing Quide Rhoda who managed the child beggars in the abandoned houses, and his assistant, Naira Rick, Thales had been at a loss as to what he should do, had he not. Thales lowered his head dejectedly. The human willpower and action will always be intangible and mysterious entities. On the other hand, society is made up of millions of intangible human hearts. Society is not a precise machine that will function perfectly just because the parameters are set properly. He must always maintain the most humble, modest, and prudent attitude when facing this world that was completely unlike his previous one, like a true social science researcher, instead of immersing himself in lofty illusions of improvements. After all, he had no system, chip, nor a skill tree like that of Sid Meier's Civilization 6.1 where only the click of a button is needed to advance the game. After all, he did not cross over to a world where everything would go according to his will either like those in those cheerful novels either. Thales fixed his gaze on the floor, unmoving. Your trickery ends here. Chapman Lampod becoming king. Olsius seemed to be very happy to see the confident 7-year-old brat speechless. As long as King Nuven is still rational, Chapman will never profit from a declaration of war, or become king. And, don't forget the enmity between them. Next time, find a better reason and think of a more logical lie before trying to sow discord between us. Olsius finished talking and prepared to leave. Behind him, Thales clenched his fist slowly. Perhaps, I'm really not fit to be a prince, or even a king. But, under Wya's bewildered stare, Thales laughed softly. At least, I want to be a survivor, and live on. Then, Thales raised his head abruptly and glared at Archduke Olsius, who did not walk far. You are wrong. Olsius' footsteps stopped. Thales' voice rang from behind him. It is precisely because King Nuven is still rational, that Chapman Lampard is destined to become the next king. And my safety is not guaranteed like you said. That is why we are having this conversation right now. This old verbal technique again. Olsius sighed. My hatred for you will only. The second prince did not give him a chance to speak. The key doesn't lie in my verbal techniques, but in whether this benefits you. Thales' gaze became firm and steady again. And whether this benefits Prestige Orchid region. Listen to what I have to say, and make your own decision. Olsius furrowed his brows. Whatever I say next is for you, alone, to hear. Thales glanced at the two muscular and sharp-eyed subordinates behind Olsius. They were obviously extraordinarily skilled. Archduke Olsius narrowed his eyes, as if in deep contemplation. Why, are you afraid that you would be assassinated by a child? Thales chuckled and said, or are you eager to go back earlier and drink a few more glasses of wine with your four good friends? Staring at the foreign prince, who appeared young but spoke maturely, Archduke Olsius found the situation strangely absurd. A few seconds later, the Archduke chuckled and ordered his followers to step back. Thales heaved a silent sigh of relief. Under his signal, his attendant, Wya, also nodded and left with a somber expression. As the braziers in the corridor burned brightly, the two figures, one larger than the other, silently faced one another in the darkness. Go ahead and tell me. Based on your theory, how would Lampard become king? Olsius did not look at Thales. He nonchalantly extended his hands towards a brazier to warm his freezing hands. With a cold expression, Thales went straight to the point. I was met with an assassin when I was right in front of Broken Dragon Fortress. The culprit intended to frame Lampard for it. Archduke Olsius pursed his lips and raised his eyebrows. I've heard of it before. It's a pity he didn't succeed, though, Olsius continued contemptuously, whether it is killing you or shifting the blame to Lampard. Paying no heed to Olsius' enmity, Thales continued speaking. This made Lampard realize that someone is scheming against him in the dark, and that his circumstances within the kingdom was not favorable. Lampard is a powerful man. This is nothing to him. Archduke Olsius was poker-faced. Thales continued to pay no heed to Olsius' words. Like the robots in his past life, he stated the facts plainly without emotion. Because of that, Lampard brought up his intention to form an alliance with me, to fight together against our enemies. He provided me with all the resources I needed in Dragon Cloud City in exchange for help of one future king of Constellation. At this moment, the corner of Olsius' lips curled up. He slipped up and started laughing. For the promise of a 7-year-old brat who hasn't even ascended the throne. Lampard must be an idiot to ally with you. He only changed his stance at the last minute because he saw that there was no hope in attacking Constellation. This can't make him king, either. The Archduke flipped his hands over and warmed the back of them. Of course, said Thales coldly. That's all. Olsius snorted softly. How are you going to help him become king? Send out an announcement, announce your support for him. At that moment, Thales' expression suddenly changed. But this is not Lampard's plan. After adopting an even tone for more than 10 seconds, he suddenly raised his voice. I am also not the one who can help him become king. Olsius' eyes flickered. He moved his gaze away from the brazier and stared at Thales. Of course he knows that I'm not worth that much. Apart from being branded with the Constellation symbol, I am completely worthless. Thales sighed, but trust me, I have met him once at his military camp. He is definitely not an idiot. HMPH, I know him better than you. Olsius clenched his fists above the brazier. His tone was cold. 12 years ago, he killed his elder brother by mercilessly nailing him to the ground in the arena. I saw it with my own eyes. Thales inhaled deeply and nodded. He only pretended to form an alliance with me. In reality, I reckon he has other plans, and he is about to carry them out. Olsius creased his brows again in deep thought. He scrutinized Thales carefully. So tell me, brat. Olsius sighed as well. He impatiently said, very well, you have successfully piqued my attention. Thales froze. This line, I think I've heard it somewhere. Whatever, it's not important. Thales sucked in a deep breath. Nuven, he spoke calmly, carefully, and slowly. Chapman Lampard wants to work together with King Nuven, to form an alliance with Walton, the Dragon Spear family, and Dragon Cloud City. A few seconds passed. Ha 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 ha. Olsius burst into unbridled laughter. He tilted his head with a nonchalant expression. Thales silently watched him. Olsius put his hands down and clasped them together. His gaze was gloomy and cold. This is your guess. I thought that you were only good at using petty little tricks. I had no idea that you are also good at creating them. I saw this with my own eyes. Lampard was trying to contact Dragon Cloud City, Thales replied coldly. Impossible. Olsius stopped smiling and resolutely said, Lampard is suspected to be Prince Mariah's murderer. That is a blood feud. King Nuven will not work with him. Thales soon caught up with Olsius' line of argument. He refuted with a cold gaze. Why do we avenge our blood relatives' deaths? So that justice will prevail. No. It is so that the same kind of harm will not come to our families again. To give our enemies the sternest warning and to ensure the continuation and prosperity of our families. Olsius frowned. To achieve this aim, everything else can be forfeited. Thales nodded slowly, including hatred and honor. Watching the Archduke's extremely doubtful expression, the second prince said plainly, King Nuven is still rational. This is what you said. The Walton family had lost their last direct descendant. However, it has not perished yet, neither will King Nuven let it perish. Olsius was shaking his head. Lampod was the one who acted first and targeted Dragon Cloud City. He even killed King Nuven's only heir. The trust is already broken. Even if he wants an ally, it will never be King Nuven. Lampod will not invite trouble for himself. Thales calmly refuted the Archduke's words. You said just now that you know Lampod better than I do. You would know whether he has the courage to risk reconciling with his enemies for the sake of his own benefit. Do not forget that a few years ago, with a hood over his head, Constellation's Duke of Northern Territory, Val Arund, formed an alliance with Lampod. The Arund family and the Lampod family were enemies for generations. Archduke Olsius inhaled deeply. Besides, you saw through our acts, didn't you? Thales could see from Olsius' eyes that he was wavering, so he continued to throw out the bait he had prepared. Why did you think that Lampod dispatched his troops to escort me to Dragon Cloud City in such a dignified manner? Did you think that King Nuven really ordered the White Blade Guards to depart early and kidnap me to Dragon Cloud City out of rage and fury? Olsius was slightly stunned. That was indeed an act. Thales tightened his face and spoke quickly so that he sounded more hurried and agitated. For all of you to see how the king's rage burns, therefore, deluding all of you and masking his deepest desires. But it is not for preventing war between Constellation and the Dragon, not for preventing the Archduke of Black Sand and other southern regions from benefiting from the war, either. It is for the sake of the alliance between Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region. Archduke Olsius pursed his lips and exhaled deeply, as if in deep contemplation. These past few days, God knows what Nicholas of Dragon Cloud City and Kenvida of Black Sand region were talking about behind closed doors. Thales sighed and said, we could only see the tension between them when they are out in public. But I can roughly guess. Thales' tone became steady once more while Olsius' gaze became deeper. The Walton family is already doomed to go downhill. The second prince sighed softly. Once King Nuven passes away, and the next king selection has passed, the Walton family might even face total annihilation. So, he must place his bet on a powerful archduke, on a future king. Even if this person is suspected to have murdered his son. Olsius turned and gazed at the moon outside. Thales slowly drew his lips together. He waited for Olsius' reply. This was the Archduke's battle. Thales had done all he could. Translator's note. Sid Meier's Civilization 6, a game created by Firaxis Games. Chapter 143 Who's There Too? A few seconds passed. Ha, citizen of the Empire, you've underestimated the nature of a Northlander. Lord Olsius snickered, shaking his head. You don't know Nuven at all. When he was young. Nevertheless, Thales noticed the tone in his utterance. Instead of the tone of assurance which he spoke with earlier, it sounded like what a wife would say when being told that her husband cheated on her, no way, he is always loyal to me, kind of self-delusion. Whoa, you have so much faith in your king. The second prince raised his head. His eyes were sparkling. Stop trying to drive a wedge between us. You don't know Nuven. Olsius turned away, his voice full of frustration. We are closer than you can imagine. I heard, but he might have been a good king when he was young. Generous and righteous, even willing to risk his own life for a mere foot soldier, Thales said casually. He is a Northlander, yes, but above all, he is only a man. A man can age. Archduke Olsius fixed his stare on Thales. I heard this from Nuven's most trusted man. I met him at his tavern, the prince said, smiling. A notable former commander of the White Blade Guards, Caslin Lampod. I think you know about him more than I do, and I believe he knew more about your king than you did. Old people always wish to arrange for the future of their offspring after their own deaths. Fun fact, this is what the Duke of the Northern Territory said. He was also responsible for the scheme to assassinate Prince Maria while he was in Constellation. Thales just provided a perfect example of taking someone's words out of context. He sighed quietly to himself. Archduke Olsius remained quiet and expressionless. You have seen how he acted back in the Hall of Heroes. Thales' eyes turned grim. What do you think a lonely old man who just lost his only son, the last beacon of hope for the family, is capable of doing? A silence ensued. Olsius took a deep breath, and then exhaled slowly. That's only your speculation, said the bearded Archduke in a deep voice, which is based solely on the ridiculous theory that suspects Nuven to have been so sensible that he could suppress the grief of losing his son. Thales pursed his lips. Olsius was still quite level-headed at this point. Secretly, Thales was pleased with himself. He let out a sigh of relief. It was the time for him to place the final card on the table for this negotiation. Thales heaved a sigh. By the time you discover any evidence of their scheme, you will have King Chapman on the throne. Archduke Olsius' beard quivered. Besides, at an inn in Constellation, our people have heard things. Thales looked down at his feet. Some chatter from an Extichian envoy in our country, Baron LaSalle. Olsius was bemused. Lampard's lackey. As he implied, Lampard was not the person behind the conspiracy against King Nuven's son. Thales nodded and smiled an enigmatic smile. The real culprit, Prince Mariah's murderer, is someone else. There was an eerily long silence that lasted longer than any periods of silence before this one. Thales stared at Archduke Olsius, watching him transition from confusion to shock, and finally falling into deep contemplation. Could he be the culprit? Eventually, Archduke Olsius gave a long sigh. Isn't the news from Constellation about? The news from Constellation is what we wanted you to think, Thales said coolly, to conclude that Lampard of Black Sand region was the evil mastermind, so that you will fall out with each other and start fighting among yourselves. We never really identified the culprit. Just so you know, the only clue we had was based on a confrontation in the palace between several Constellation suzerains. We couldn't even be certain that Black Sand region was somehow involved in the killing. Archduke Olsius' pupils slowly contracted. Clearly, this piece of information was beyond his expectations. This has always been the favorite tactic of the Black Prophet, Morat, of Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department. Thales shook his head in resignation. In other words, the feud between Walton and Lampard, between Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region which you have always believed in might not exist, which means if Lampard could convince King Nuven that he did not take part in the plot to kill Prince Mariah. Olsius stared at Thales in disbelief. There might not be any blood feud between Nuven Walton and Chapman Lampard at all, Thales said with a sigh, giving a shrug. They could ally with each other. On the contrary, Nuven wouldn't trust you, because maybe, Thales thought of Conan, a fictional, bespectacled child detective in a blue suit from an anime he watched in his past life. He mimicked the way Conan adjusted his glasses, touching his nose bridge, his eyes narrowed, and pointed at Olsius. The real mastermind was among you. Thales was not done yet. Still with his eyes narrowed, he dropped another bombshell. The culprit also did something else, King Nuven told me. Archduke Olsius's pupils slowly shrank. He said that the person also attempted to kill me with a mystic gun unit at Broken Dragon Fortress, and then shift the blame to Lampard. The Archduke's breathing became heavier with each passing moment. Thales watched him closely, refusing to let any of the Archduke's expressions escape his eyes. A few seconds later, the Archduke of Prestige Orchid lowered his head and chuckled. Olsius' gaze was sharp. If what you said is true, they could indeed become allies, but these are all empty words. There's no evidence whatsoever. Thales expected this reaction. Unfazed, he responded, Marquis Shiles, the city envoy from Camus. We have had quite a conversation throughout the journey. The intel from his network suggested that the day Nicholas arrived at Lampard's military camp, the night he greeted my arrival, he released 3 messenger crows at midnight. You may confirm with him that the breeding and selling of messenger crows is a business trade in Good Flow City. But receiving an envoy from a rival country wasn't a big deal. Why would anyone need to contact Dragon Cloud City 3 times at the military camp in Black Sand region? The look on Olsius' face was grim. Thales gave him a firm nod. We can tell that at least one of them was trying to contact the other. Lord Olsius wordlessly placed a hand on his sword hilt. If Nuven really intended to ally with a likely successor to the throne for the survival of the Walton family, I, or even Rockney of faraway Prayer City, would be a better choice than Black Sand region. The Archduke spoke after a moment of silence and firmly threw him a question in his response. Besides, even if they are in cahoots, how exactly will things go according to their plan? Exted is unlike Constellation. We choose our king. Nuven can't possibly appoint Lampard as his heir before his death, can he? Thales again recalled a famous question directed at one infamous politician in his past life, can this be an order made by the authorities? 2. And he burst into laughter. Well, no, the prince uttered, Chapman Lampard of Black Sand region has certain advantages that make him the best candidate for the throne. Olsius said nothing. He was waiting for the foreign prince's answer. Your Grace, aren't you curious that, with the feud revolving around the Fortress Treaty, and after what happened to Prince Mariah, why 2 countries have not gone to war yet? Thales asked lazily. Olsius' gaze flickered slightly. You, still staring at Thales, the Archduke's gaze slowly changed. You were sent to Exted, in the name of the King of Constellation. Your father swore that your safety will ensure peace between the 2 kingdoms. If not, there will be a total war that is more destructive and more costly than an Archduke could bear on his own. By then the whole of Exted will be involved. Therefore, it's only wise for King Nuven to stay on the Jadastar's side, prevent a war, and keep Black Sand region in his place. Olsius' face grew increasingly sour, while Thales gave a smirk. Yes, these 2 factors are the main reasons Exted hasn't waged war on Constellation yet. If these excuses are taken out of the equation, if King Nuven is no longer wary of the price of warfare, manages to demand compulsory participation from all the archdukes in the name of the common elected king, and eases each archduke's concerns for having to face the Constellation army alone. If King Nuven no longer needs to prevent Black Sand region from expanding their territory, but instead needs to help them with that to make sure they obtain leverage for the king selection. Lampod of Black Sand region will undoubtedly stand to become the biggest beneficiary of the war, being close to the northern territory of Constellation and, most of all, having King Nuven's support. Olsius looked up at the ceiling. His expression was obscured from Thales. Now you know why King Nuven summoned you to discuss the mobilization of the army, and even attempted to observe your attitude towards the decision to kill me. Thales gazed down at his feet as the hubbub of the banquet echoed in the distance. Archduke Olsius lowered his head. The second prince of Constellation gave a light chuckle. I wonder if you are ready for it. Thales raised an eyebrow and spread out his arms. To call Lampod, Your Majesty. That's why. Rabian Olsius stared at Thales. This time, there was no hatred and hostility in his eyes, only solemnity. You came to me, even if their alliance is merely your speculation. Thales gave a pained nod and sighed deeply. Yes, perhaps Lampod is still trying to contact King Nuven. Turning his neck, he rubbed his palms together in frustration. Perhaps they haven't joined forces yet. Even if they have, this situation, to you, is not potentially irreversible. Nuven suspects that someone among you is the culprit for Mariah's death, and Lampod might become your king. These are the losses you could face, Archduke Olsius. However, you don't have to bear consequences that soon, so don't worry. Thales lifted his chin, staring at Olsius solemnly. On the other hand, if things end up the way I suspect it will, Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region will seize control over all of Extit. War will be declared. With a hint of anxiety in his vacant voice, the prince continued, I, still being in Extit, will become the first victim. I will meet my tragic fate before any of you do. This is why I came to you. It's for my life. Thales glared at Lord Olsius, who seemed stunned. He said through clenched teeth, and for your future as well. The two of them fell silent again. The sounds of commotion and the crackling of the fire echoed in the background. Why me? Olsius said in a hoarse voice. Why not the others? Rockney, Pofret, they seem more reliable, don't they? Thales stared at him, shaking his head lightly. Only yours and Trentida's territories are the closest to both Constellation and Black Sand region. You can't turn a blind eye to any matters involving them. As for Trentida, I don't trust him, the prince whispered. Hence, out of all the 5 archdukes, you, Rabian Olsius of Prestige Orchid, are most likely to side with me. Olsius inhaled deeply and peered out of the window. A moment later, the archduke turned around to face Thales with a sharp glare. At this point, just tell me what you plan to do. Thales mentally snapped his fingers. He smiled and said, we are still in King Nuven's palace. There are very few chances to meet and talk. You can verify the clues I had observed. If you think that my speculation makes sense and agree that certain precautions must be made, I have struck a deal with Lord Shiles. He will provide me some intel. Tonight's banquet will go on until the next morning, or even the next afternoon. Archduke Olsius nodded. At 4 in the morning, the palace and city gates will open. By then, the first group of guests will leave. The guards will be as exhausted as they are. You can evade them all and leave the banquet hall, Thales said cautiously. Meet me in the meeting hall. I will leave the party at 1:2, and find an excuse to rest there. And then, we will come up with a plan, to keep me alive and jeopardize the alliance between Nuven and Lampod. Olsius stared at him. I will consider it. The bearded archduke had a complicated expression. But, only consider it. Of course, Thales arched an eyebrow. It's up to you whether you come or not. The archduke fell silent. While Thales was feeling anxious, Olsius let out a chuckle. Little brat, you might be one of the very few smart people I've met. The archduke shook his head. But I still don't like you one bit. No offense taken, Thales responded promptly with a smile. After all, Jadestar and Olsius are mortal enemies. In the end, Olsius glanced at him with a complicated and cryptic expression. Then, the archduke turned and left. Wya came and stood before Thales as the latter stared after Olsius' silhouette until it disappeared around a corner. Then Thales gave a sigh of relief. The prince began to relax, his body went limp, and was held up gently by Wya. Your Highness, the attendant whispered, how did it go? He saw through my connection with Nuven right away. Shaken, Thales felt himself bathed in cold sweat. Luckily, I improvised a bit. He looked up at Wya. What did Ralph say? Hesitantly, Wya made a few hand gestures he himself did not even know the meaning of. Very well, it means Marquis Shiles has held the third archduke up. Thales wiped the sweat from the back of his skull, shaking his head. Look, here is your reply. With these gestures, get Poutre to deliver the note. The next target should be on his way. Hopefully Shiles' acting is good enough to not raise Olsius' suspicion. Several minutes later, Thales had recomposed himself, and now stood in another corridor. He recalled the general temperament of his target, and made his decision. Hearing footsteps behind him, he took a deep breath and turned around. Accompanied by Wya, he flashed the most dazzling smile at the person who approached them. Your Grace, my lord, do you know who would be the next common elected king of Extit? In the next second, the Archduke of Reformation Tower, Porpheus Trentida, the man with the bowl cut, stood firmly before Thales. He scowled at Thales with a face full of doubt. 10 minutes to 4 in the morning. Heroic Spirit Palace, Meeting Hall. Thales sat at the long table where King Nuvan was yesterday. Staring at the empty stone hall, he felt a little unsettled. There was only one thing he feared more than darkness and loneliness, the anxiety and uncertainty of the unknown. The contents in the braziers behind him burned and crackled without care in regards to all the things around them. He placed his hand on the long table and sighed. Who will show up later? His conversations with all 5 archdukes had finally come to an end, amid all his panic and fear. The first was Olsius of Prestige Orchid, the one who made him nervous the most, on whom he had spent more time on, and who almost found out about his connection with King Nuvan, putting him at risk of ruining their scheme. Trentida of Reformation Tower appeared skeptical, but their conversation was relatively brief compared to the former. Trentida fully comprehended what Thales meant soon enough. His gaze was brimming with skepticism, though it was unknown whether it was directed towards him or Nuvan. The 2 archdukes from the southern territories were not the most difficult people to deal with. Archduke Lecco of Defense City to the north was the third one. This bald old man, however, was the hardest. Every now and then, his seemingly old and inane gaze flickered with sparks of acuity. He snorted at Thales and remained doubtful until the end. Thales, with a forced smile on his face, had to spend about 20 minutes on their conversation. Compared to that, his talk with Archduke Rockney of faraway Prayers City in the west ended rather quickly. The long-haired archduke stayed silent the entire time, and responded with only frequent nods or head shakes. Seeing him, Thales could not help but feel that to Rockney, it did not matter to him whoever it was that becomes king. The last person was the Archduke of Beacon Illumination City, the brown-haired Concre Pafret. He was the friendliest of all archdukes, and the one most alarmed by Thales. When he left the hall in a daze, Thales even had to offer a word of comfort, that none of the things he said had happened, yet. But, in his hand, Thales squeezed the pocket watch Poutre gave him. The cold metallic feel made him tense. Who could it be? Who would show up tonight? Who is the person who hired the disaster swordsman to assassinate Mariah, and then tried to eliminate me? Perhaps, no one would bother to show up. If I can't find the culprit, Thales chuckled helplessly to himself. Hopefully King Nuvan will kick the bucket tonight. At that moment, the sound of footsteps appeared from outside the stone hall. Thud, thud. Thales was alarmed. He sat up and straightened his back. The footsteps were heavy and rhythmic, echoing one after another, stomping on the stone brick floor. As they advanced, a shadow was cast into the stone hall. It seemed to belong to an especially tall person, who finally strode into the meeting hall. Illuminated by the firelight, Thales discerned the figure's long hair and incredibly stony expression. His robe was embroidered with the image of a scroll. The second prince was startled. It was the one person, of all the archdukes, he did not expect. The flames in the braziers continued to burn. The man stopped before him. I am here, he said faintly. Thales hopped down from his chair, frowning. He still remembered how this man refused to follow King Nuvan's order to kill the Prince of Constellation in a duel. His reason being that child killing was a disgrace to his honor. But right now, he stood here in front of Thales. Good day to you. The Prince of Constellation paused, staring at the tall, large man with an almond-shaped face before him, and sighed in disappointment. Extit's Archduke of faraway Prayers City, Kulgan Rockney. Translator's note. 1. The bespectacled child detective in a blue suit is the protagonist of a Japanese anime, Detective Conan, whose signature posture was adjusting his glasses while identifying the perpetrator of the crime by pointing at them. 2. Can this be an order made by the authorities? In October 2000, a question was asked by a Hong Kong reporter regarding Beijing's alleged attempt to ensure the reappointment of the then chief executive of Hong Kong. It was directed at Jiang Zemin, former general secretary of the Communist Party of China. Said utterance became part of the Moha culture internet meme when said reporter was berated by Jiang for asking so. Chapter 144 The Sword of Baptism's Death. In the heart of Dragon Cloud City, in an alley of the Armor District, 3 old friends had finally drawn swords against one another. Under the moonlight, Cohen cupped his nose, which had been damaged for no reason, and shot a glance at the man and woman who attacked each other because of their disagreement. He knew that he did not have the right to intervene on this duel. Miranda would not let him. His poor nose could attest to that. Luckily for him, compared to a few years back, Miranda had learned how to control her strength. Cohen shifted his attention back to the fight, in which Miranda initiated the first attack. Her sword aimed at Raphael's chest. Meanwhile, Raphael lifted his thin-bladed sword in his left hand and launched a counterattack at a much higher speed than Miranda, directing it at her throat. However, as if Miranda had predicted his next move, she redirected the course of her sword's movement and swung it at Raphael's left hand. From afar, it looked as though he stretched his arm out to meet her sword. Cohen was amazed. It was the power of Miranda's Pegasus music that listened and controlled the pace of the fight, rendering the opponent a puppet of his own making. Raphael's eyebrows furrowed. He retracted his weapon and was forced to retreat. He knew very well what his former lover was capable of, trying to avoid following her pace. However, Miranda's gaze was as cold as ice. She launched a timely attack, and when Raphael pulled back his right leg, she cut towards his left leg, which acted as his center of gravity, interrupting his pace when he retreated and tried to regain his composure. Raphael was forced into a pathetic state by that sword and was forced to stop retreating to intercept this sword. Right at that moment, as if Miranda predicted Raphael's movements, she moved her arm, and the whooshing sound of wind rose. Cohen panicked as he watched them from afar. In 10 seconds, their swords did not connect, clash, or collide. They merely swung their swords in the air, stirring up ripples in the air. In spite of that, Cohen knew it was a treacherous duel. His teacher, Zedai Tafner, once told him, before he became a police officer, that a fast-paced and silent sword fight mostly took place between two supreme-class individuals. In the next moment, Cohen saw Miranda's blade avoid Raphael's block, evade Raphael's sword that was avoiding her strike, and avoided his counterattack in the nick of time, and then instantly flung at Raphael's head. Shing! The sound of a sword slashing through the air rang out. In that moment, Raphael's dark red eyes flickered with a strange emotion. His left arm visibly trembled, and then, the thin blade left behind afterimages under the moonlight as it swung in the air. Ting! Their weapons clashed for the first time, emitting an ear-splitting screech in the air. Cohen knit his brows firmly, suppressing the urge to cover his ears. Raphael gnashed his teeth and took 3 steps back in alarm. Meanwhile, Miranda remained where she stood. Her silhouette flickered. A silence descended upon them. Stony-faced, Miranda made a jerk with her wrist and a few strands of hair flew off her sword. Raphael panted slightly, touching his right temple. A bleeding gash appeared across his sideburn. Cohen sighed, unsurprised. Miranda was still unquestionably the strongest among them. Raphael rubbed off the blood on his hand. He sighed and shook his head with a bitter smile. When it comes to meticulous observation, looking for opportunities in the beat of the fight, you are skilled as always, Miranda. Cohen made a cough, eyeing Miranda's expression cautiously. So, Raphael, I guess that's all for today. It has been a long time. Miranda had yet to know about Raphael's power of eradication. If the fight went on, the eagle-eyed Miranda would. He had to stop the fight. But at that very moment, a voice that startled both men rang abruptly. Raphael, where has your sword of baptism's death gone? Cohen felt a shiver. Raphael bowed his head. Miranda's voice was shaking. The power of eradication that uses its offensive abilities to replace all manners of defense, and which is the absolute form of all counterattacks. All these years, you are the only person whose awakened power could dissipate the rhythm dominance effect of the Pegasus music. Why is it gone? Cohen closed his eyes woefully. Damn, she found out. Miranda suddenly raised her head. Under the moonlight, her cold facial expression was tinted with a hint of panic and disbelief. This is not the rhythm of the sword of baptism's death. It's not even your regular sparring rhythm, the swordswoman said slowly. Despite my hands, I could feel the chilliness. The power that resides in your hands, it's a different power. What is that, Raphael Lindbergh? Miranda's eyes were like 2 sharp blades that shot at the silent Raphael. Cohen slapped himself on the temple with extreme vexation. The 3 of them said nothing for a few seconds until Raphael began, gently and coolly, this is the prayer of the dead. Frankly speaking, it is similar to the sword of baptism's death. The young man in white snickered. His voice sounded cheerful and casual. It fights for the slimmest chances for its wielder's survival within milliseconds, and the ability to turn defeat into final victory is brought to its absolute limits. Their styles are very similar. I had assumed your hands wouldn't sense the difference. Just like how the touch of greed is the disaster sword's equivalent to the glory of the stars, Miranda, whose eyebrows were twisted into a deep knot, asked again anxiously, this so-called prayer of the dead is the dark counterpart to the sword of baptism's death. Her gaze was filled with indescribable emotions and fixed on Raphael. The power of eradication belongs to the disaster sword. Cohen was astounded. Looks like Miranda has collected a substantial amount of information about disaster swords, and in such a short time. While Cohen thought of the young man who managed to escape, and blushed. Klein was being too chatty with you. Deep in thought, Raphael narrowed his eyes. Even if he is a rebellious successor from outside the tower, for someone who is nearly a supreme-class swordsman, he talks too much. Unexpectedly, Miranda started laughing. Cohen was startled, and Raphael's eyebrows drew together. Is this what you have been keeping from me, Cohen? Amid her laughter, without turning around, Miranda said to Cohen with a cracked voice, the seed selected by Tower of Eradication once every 5 years, one of the candidates to become the Supreme Scion, Raphael Lindbergh. Joined the disaster swords? The question caused Cohen to squeeze his eyes shut. Raphael stayed silent. The police officer tried to speak but hesitated when he was about to do so, his mouth opened and closed. Eventually, he lowered his head. All the words he intended to say turned into a sigh. All of a sudden, Miranda leapt forward like lightning. Her sword shot forward like a fleeting swan. This time, however, she was not aiming at Raphael's vitals, she aimed at the sword in his left hand. Cohen was bemused. Attacking the opponent's weapon was not the standard tactic. What surprised him was that Raphael, who had been smiling the whole time, paled at this non-threatening slash. Clang. The two blades collided once more, but Miranda retracted her sword immediately. She glared at Raphael, unblinking, as if she had forgotten about everything else around her. Meanwhile, Raphael watched her. His face had paled as though his vitals were attacked. Cohen rubbed the back of his skull, gawking at them with bewilderment. Weird, the attack just now did not inflict any injury at all. Why are these two acting so weirdly? Miranda's voice came a moment later. This is the reason why the sword of baptism's death disappeared. The voice of the daughter of Arund quivered. For 3 years, 3 years. It was him, that's the reason, him. The young man in white was stunned with Miranda, his expression was hard to read. Mira, she found out at last. Their first encounter after 3 years, and she found out right away. He closed his eyes. The swordswoman lifted her chin and shouted at him, Raphael, you lofty moron. Raphael said nothing, he merely watched her calmly. Cohen gawked at Miranda, she seemed to be having a meltdown. What just happened? Wasn't she a strong independent superwoman a moment ago? Why is she turning into a distressed ex-girlfriend, all of a sudden? A second later, the swordswoman whipped around and stabbed at the wall next to her with her sword. Chink. Raphael heaved a long sigh. With a dark look, Miranda let go of the sword and let the sword handle shake in the wind. This man, I curse him, she turned around, teeth clenched. Full of despair and anger, she gave a chilly laugh. He deserves it, serves him right, the swordswoman bellowed. Raphael slipped his sword back into its sheath. Don't be upset, Mira. The young man in white shook his head and said softly, it's not worth it. Cohen's jaw dropped, he was almost driven mad by the situation before him. What's with these two? They stopped halfway through the fight, and then started talking cryptically in cries and coos. Sword of baptism's death, lofty moron, he deserves it, not worth it. He, the Class 2 police officer of the Western Police Station and the head patrolman of the city defense team of Eternal Star City, Cohen Karabayan, was flummoxed. It's impossible to understand what's going on. Cohen scratched his head in frustration. He inched closer to his two friends and chimed in, I think, can anyone explain this situation to me? Miranda, I know Raphael owns the power of a disaster sword, but must you have a meltdown? Miranda and Raphael looked at him simultaneously, glowering as they yelled. Shut up, Cohen. Miranda was burning with rage. Not now, Cohen. Raphael's facial expression was cold as ice. Cohen, interrupted by the both of them at the same time, had his half-open mouth hanging in the air. His eyes widened in an innocent and bewildered fashion. With both arms in the air and a smile on his face, he nodded and bent his back in an overly polite and obedient fashion before he took a step back. All right, you two continue, go on. The confused police officer then mumbled to himself, an unintelligent person like me probably shouldn't join in. This stupid couple. Interrupted by Cohen, the three of them remained quiet for another long while. Two of them were immersed in complicated and profound emotions, while the third one heaved a sigh of boredom. Miranda tried to regain her composure, lowered her head, and let out a cold laugh. So, the sword of baptism's death is never coming back, is it? Just like you. Raphael knew what she intended to say. He sighed softly with a complex look in his eyes. The sword of baptism's death originated from the warring period in the Chronicles of Constellation's Kings. The young man in white shook his head ruefully. A brave, skilled, and loyal knight was betrayed by his king and died tragically with a tainted name. However, the son of the knight managed to escape. He washed the blood off his father's sword by the river and vowed to get revenge, Raphael said. Many years later, he joined the enemy kingdom and became a knight. After years of brutal, bloody battles and massacres, the young knight, at long last, led his new king's army to raid the tyrant's castle and personally slaughtered his enemy. However, this did not satisfy him. As he tread down his path with the flames of vengeance burning the roads he walked, he felt only emptiness and grief. Seeing the daughter his enemy had left behind, seeing the fear and resentment in her eyes, the knight's steely heart softened, and a realization dawned on him. Raphael's eyes dimmed, he lowered his head and continued. What's the point of this? The knight said, old vengeance must be sought, but new enmity will grow. The cycle of hatred among kings is endless. Death and vengeance form an integral part in their lives. They intersect with each other and bloom like flowers. Tragedy has never disappeared from the king's lives, and the emptiness they feel is bottomless. Miranda listened to Raphael's story whereas Cohen scratched his head with frustration. He was fed up with these two. The knight, then, brought the princess away from the bloodshed and corpses, the hatred and the grim castle. He stood in the blinding daylight and wiped the tears of fear off her face. Right there the knight made an oath. He wanted to end the hate and death-ridden world. From then on, his superpower was named the sword of baptism's death. Raphael finished the story. Miranda stood quietly in her original spot. Ha, Cohen laughed dryly, trying to join the conversation. It sounds like a cliched knight saga. A protagonist with a tragic background, noble blood, a powerful enemy, he grew stronger, but went limp before a woman, and then swore to rule the unruly world. Shut it, Cohen. This time, the couple snapped at him with the same verbal speed and tone of voice. Cohen obliged dejectedly. Raphael turned to Miranda with an undecipherable look and said with a chuckle, "See, nothing else matters compared to a greater cause. Do you understand that?" Miranda gazed at Raphael. Her eyes were brimming with rage and anguish. So, the secret intelligence is the answer. The corner of Raphael's lips quivered. He nodded. In the stillness, the two of them stared at each other in mutual understanding, until Miranda agonizingly averted her gaze. "I wasn't joking earlier. What is about to happen will affect the future of two kingdoms. Tonight, Dragon Cloud City will plunge into chaos." Raphael straightened his clothes and looked up at the faraway heroic spirit palace under the moonlight. A smile crept back onto his face. In fact, it has already begun. Chapter 145 The Wait. Cohen exhaled. From the very beginning until now, he hasn't understood a thing. Even the police officers have started doubting themselves. He made up his mind that no matter what the couple of cheaters said, it would not stop him from forcing them to cease their guessing games. They caused him to feel depressed and isolated, even though such scenarios often occurred in the Tower of Eradication. "So, do you want to tell us the truth or not?" Cohen said grumpily. "The disaster sword, the secret intelligence department, what about the reason for your presence?" Raphael looked at him with a subtle gaze. "Hey, I wouldn't mind joining hands with Miranda to finish you off." Cohen subconsciously patted his saber. Looking at Cohen's expression, Raphael faintly smiled. The young man, who was wearing a white shirt, resumed talking in his typical optimistic tone. "You know, Cohen, I've always envied you. You have such a simple world, a simple mentality, just simple happiness. It is as lovely as a story in a knight's novel." Cohen stared at him blankly. Simple. A knight's novel. Cohen's brows were scrunched together. This guy really knows when to insult someone. Miranda scoffed. Looking at Miranda's smiling expression, Raphael's eyes began to twitch. Following that, he smiled too. A wave of familiarity surged in Cohen's heart. Everything harked back to the time when the three of them were still in the tower. "Remember, keep a low profile and stay hidden." Raphael slowly turned around and whispered, "Find a good hideout. Stop being concerned about people like him." The next moment, Raphael's shadow disappeared into the small alleyway outside. "Hey." Cohen's expression changed. He was about to go after Raphael, but Miranda grabbed his arm and held him back. Miranda looked down and faintly said, "Cohen, stop chasing him already." Cohen looked at Miranda in disbelief. "You're just going to let him leave like that?" The police officer indignantly raised his arms into the air and said, "It's our first time meeting in 3 years and you're not going to ask about a thing? Not even about the disaster sword?" Miranda did not raise her head or look in the direction where Raphael had disappeared. She absent-mindedly said, "There's no need to ask anymore. He definitely still carries out missions for the Secret Intelligence Department." The voice of Arun's daughter became softer and softer as she said, "Furthermore, I wasn't the one who made him leave." Cohen looked at the swordswoman, feeling puzzled. Miranda sighed. "I can't beat him anymore." Cohen was stunned. In a daze, he stared at the swordswoman, the chief seed of the Tower of Eradication's 8 seeds. She had her head hung low. Something's not right. Cohen noticed that somewhere along the lines, Miranda's supposedly braided, black hair had gotten loose. When he remembered something, Cohen was shocked by his own thoughts. He looked down and found Miranda's hair tie under the moonlight. It was already broken. The incision was neat and flat, like it was cut by a sword. Cohen's expression changed immediately. This was when Raphael and Miranda battled for the first time. Cohen looked at Miranda in disbelief. Raphael held back, just now. Battles between swordsmen had always been unpredictable. It may have been easy to kill a swordsman, but to spare one meant that there had to be at least one party who possessed beyond superb swordsmanship and control of the situation. The thing was, Cohen clearly remembered, although Raphael came in second in their comprehensive assessment, when it came to one-on-one battles, he was one of the bottom 3s among the 8 seeds. But now, Miranda was speechless. Cohen gasped arduously. As he looked at the hair tie on the floor, he came to a realization that his old friend had become a stranger. In confusion, Cohen said, "Miranda, that final story you told about the knight and the princess, what did it mean?" Miranda remained silent for a few seconds. Cohen, as a family member, the Sword of the Twin Towers and son of the Caribbean family, your historical knowledge is really below average," Miranda said as she forced a bitter smile. Cohen blushed. Okay then. He could only admit it. However, he was without a doubt unfamiliar with the history regarding the Chronicles of Constellation's Kings. Was that not the job of historians? Shaking her head, Miranda silently explained as she kept her gaze on the ground, the knight's name is Camelot Carlos, and that princess, his enemy's daughter, eventually became his wife. Such a risque scenario. Cohen furrowed his brows. Wait a minute, Camelot, isn't that name a little familiar? Miranda ignored him and continued with her story. After that, the knights fought for 20 years. They suppressed the awful chaos of war and brought peace, resulting in the establishment of their ideal nation. Cohen's brows were furrowed even tighter. Suppressed the awful chaos of war, resulting in the establishment of the ideal nation. Because of the magnitude and remarkability of his merits, even the pastor of Bright God Church couldn't find a coronation and crowning ceremony suitable for him. Miranda lightly laughed. She then softly said, hence, the knight's wife weaved a jasmine garland with her own hands for his coronation. His subordinates and citizens gave him an unprecedented title. Miranda plainly finished by saying, Supreme Emperor. In that instant, Cohen's mouth opened as wide as ever. He was the first emperor in history, Great Emperor Camelot. It was he who conquered all lands and established the ancient empire as we know it. With bewilderment in his eyes, Cohen kept scratching his head. Okay, looks like his historical knowledge is indeed subpar. So, Raphael meant, Cohen hesitated. At this moment, the unexpected happened. Miranda suddenly turned around, after which she raised both hands and rested them on Cohen's broad shoulders. She hugged the police officer. Then, she buried her face in his chest. The weight of her whole body shifted towards Cohen. Cohen froze. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds passed. Cohen stared blankly at Miranda in his arms. The next moment, he immediately recomposed himself and jumped in surprise. What's happening? Miranda, the delivish, monstrous Miranda, lying in my arms. This isn't right. The script wasn't written like this. There's a Far Eastern proverb that says, a brother's wife is off limits. When she comes back to her senses, if Raphael finds out, At that instant. I'm sorry. The swordswoman's words were laced with a trembling, sobbing tone. It sounded muffled as it came from Cohen's arms. Cohen was startled. Is she sobbing? From now on, I'm going to treat you like a wall. Miranda's voice was somewhat blurred and distorted. I need to lean here for a while. It seemed like she was on the verge of crying out. Cohen lowered his head in disbelief and looked at Miranda. The contrast between the typically strong, independent appearance of the swordswoman and the one embracing him, confessing came more as a surprise to Cohen. He also noticed that Miranda was trembling a little while she was leaning on his arms and resting her hands on his shoulders. About that, Miranda, Cohen said helplessly. He could only pat Miranda on the back awkwardly. It's going to be okay. You're the chief seed of the Tower of Eradication. On top of that, you're the Deputy Duchess of the Northern Territory, Lady Miranda Arund. No matter what happens, you can. Wait a minute. Cohen staggered. He recalled Miranda's keen observation skills. Could it be that? Miranda, Cohen said blankly, did you discover something during your recent battle? And as a result, your conversation with Raphael started to become strange after that. Miranda trembled again in his arms. Cohen was assured of his conjecture. It's Raphael, am I right? You struck his sword and uncovered something. Recalling Raphael's expression, Cohen clenched his jaw and asked, Raphael, what exactly happened to him? Miranda began to shiver again. A wave of sadness flowed through his heart as he gazed at Miranda's expression. I can't tell you, but it was terrible. Following her raspy voice, the swordswoman's head trembled faintly once more. Raphael, something terrible happened to him. Very terrible. Very, very terrible. Ellipsis. Heroic Spirit Palace, Hall of Heroes. Spit it out. Under the glow of a fire, the long-haired Archduke Kulgan Rockney scowled. Looking at Thales, who had a peculiar expression on his face, he spoke in his typically serious tone. What is your plan if Walton and Lampod are truly allied? Thales gradually opened his mouth and said a little awkwardly, well, actually. At this moment, a second set of footsteps was heard outside the stone hall. Inside, the two of them shifted their gaze at the same time. As the shadow moved into the hall, the third person materialized before Thales and Archduke Rockney's eyes. Thales stared blankly at the newcomer. The man with the bowl cut donned a face full of doubt. The Archduke of Southern Extit, Porphyus Trendita of the Reformation Tower lifted his head and looked at Rockney, then at Thales. Trendita stared back at Rockney with a peculiar expression on his face. My, Prince Thales, you did not inform me that you have invited an outsider. And the glorious, proud Rockney of all people. Could it be that you are also interested in such crafty plots and machinations? Archduke Rockney pinched his brows together as he went into deep thought. Thales laughed in embarrassment. Please don't take offense. These two people. Tap, tap, tap. Another set of footsteps came from outside the hall. Rockney and Thales exchanged glances and looked out for the newcomer. At the sound of the feeble footsteps, the bald Archduke Lecco of Defense City in the north walked into the meeting hall cautiously. Thales exhaled deeply. 3 people. 3 archdukes. The elderly Archduke Leko observed the three people in the room. He could not help but softly say, "It seems like things are quite lively here today. It looks like someone is playing us for fools." Trendita fixed a complex gaze on Thales. "This little prince of Constellation promised me a private meeting." "You little brat," said Archduke Rockney with a fierce expression. Thales' face twitched as he forced a smile. "It's not what you think. I knew there was a problem." An obviously dissatisfied voice spread across the hall and traveled into the ears of the four people. Thales, Rockney, Trendita and Leko collectively turned around. Carrying heavy footsteps, the bearded Archduke of Prestige Orchid, Rabian Olsius walked into the meeting hall. His complexion was dreary. Thales let out a deep sigh. "Four archdukes." Thales opened his eyes as he restlessly said, "Well, your excellencies, it looks like you are all very interested in the secret overturning of the Walton royal family." The four archdukes looked at each other in dismay. Instantly, they understood something. Archduke Olsius looked at the rigid Thales with an angry expression. "I see, little brat, you did not tell everyone the same thing, did you? I really salute you." The long-haired Archduke Rockney sighed and shook his head. "With just a few words, you have lured us all here." Thales took a deep breath as he bore the ill-meaning glares from the archdukes. "Shall we wait a moment then? To complete the five of us?" Trendita sarcastically said, "Maybe that Pofret boy is on his way here." Just as Thales was buckling under the archduke's interrogation, more footsteps were heard. The four archdukes simultaneously scowled and looked at their surroundings. Numerous people dressed as guards and servants walked in a line into the meeting hall. Many braziers were also lit up. The stone hall was suddenly as bright as daytime. A familiar ancient voice came through. "This is just so touching." The elderly voice caused the four archdukes to change color at once. The cruel and sharp Rabian Olsius. The cunning Porpheus Trendita. The unsmiling Kulgan Rockney. And the seemingly loyal Rogers Leko. With just a little provocation, the four archdukes are now in doubt and conspiring against your king. I'm not dead yet, but you impatiently eye for Extit's throne already. Flanked by 2 rows of white blade guards and Nicholas, Neuven Walton VII walked into his meeting hall with a face of prestige as well as dignity. The common elected king of Extit approached the high seat by the long table underneath the Soul Slayer pike. He raised his head and casted his gaze on the four archdukes. In that moment, Thales suddenly noticed that the old king still had a very tall and lofty build. From the crowd, Marquis Shiles and Poutre came forth to Thales' side. The former plastered his typical smile across his face and nodded at him. The latter just pursed his lips as he observed everything in the hall. The four archdukes looked at each other with different expressions, then back at King Neuven. "Screw you, little brat." Archduke Olsius spat. He locked his fierce gaze on Thales as he said, "Conspiring with the king, playing us all at once." "What now, your majesty?" Rockney hardly cared as he sat on the long table. "You want to punish us for a crime, just because the four of us came to gather in the meeting hall." Trendita glanced at Thales with a face full of ill intentions, and it gave the latter chills that ran up his spine. "Or does that brat there want to accuse us of errant conspiracies against the throne?" "Our entourage and guards are all up there, your majesty." Archduke Leko exhaled with a complicated expression on his face. "If you want to get rid of us, now will be an unprecedented opportunity." "This is terrible." Thales sighed. He suddenly realized that he had apparently drawn a lot of hatred to himself. He could only smile sheepishly and spread his arms. Actually, this was all King Neuven's. At this point, King Neuven interrupted him. "Porpheus is not wrong." King Neuven slowly exhaled. His fluctuating yet imposing voice echoed across the stone hall. "There's only one thing we need to do." Under King Neuven's sharp gaze, the four archdukes were all stumped for words. The old king's elderly yet powerful voice was the only audible thing as he slowly said, "Wait." Chapter 146 The Culprit. It was the first time Thales saw the dark gold crown atop King Neuven's head. The king was adorned in a golden-red ensemble, which was both solemn and impressive. With his own backing as a robust king and while being surrounded by his vassals, he descended the steps and walked towards the meeting hall's central long table. He sat on the throne exclusively for the common elected king. In Thales' eyes, this nearly 70-year-old man had lost his dull, cryptic first impression. What replaced it was an unprecedented prestigious spirit, like a silent yet frightening lion in its pride. Neuven Walton VII had a tall, straight back. He supported himself with the armrest as he shot his bright, expressive eyes across the hall. Under the obvious scrutiny of the king, the four archdukes unnaturally turned their heads and averted their gazes. Lord Merk stood behind the king with a serious expression on his face. Dozens of elite warriors from the White Blade Guard stood at every corner of the meeting hall, vigilantly holding on to their white sword handles. There were more unfamiliar faces for Thales. The king was flanked by 2 rows of men, who had mixed expressions on their faces and wore robes supposedly meant for noblemen. They exchanged undisguised glances among themselves as well. This was also Thales' first time seeing King Neuven's personal vassals from the royal court of Dragon Cloud City. Compared to the neat and regulated royal court of Constellation, whether it be their placement, posture, movement or expression, Extit's ruler and his vassals had a certain fierce, rough, and wild aura that seemed to seep through from their bones. It made them appear casual and unrefined. This disturbed people who witnessed the scene for the first time. It felt like they were standing in the midst of carnivorous animals. Thales could not help but glance at Poutre. He received a slight nod in return. Wait. In the meeting hall, the long-haired Archduke Rockney expressed his doubts in a muffled, rumbly voice. What do you mean, Your Majesty? Nobody answered him. Archduke Trendita glanced at the white-haired, bright-eyed vassals by King Nuven's side. His face paled as he said, Your Majesty, I do not know what you are trying to do. But from the presence of Count Lisbon, the chief of governmental officers, to Count Seiler, who handles foreign affairs, have you brought half the imperial conference here before us? Could it be that you want to discuss why the wine at the banquet was so sour earlier? He asked half sarcastically, half accusingly. Archduke Olsius, who stood by his side, did not hesitate to stare at the king as well. Not without concern, Thales took in the scenario before him. How will things end? It seems like all this while, my leniency has spoilt a lot of you. There was an elderly vassal, who was half a century old next to King Nuven. He replied, the Archduke of Reformation Tower, with no trace of politeness. Listen well, Your Excellencies, Archdukes of Extit. The king you vowed to be loyal to, the common master the Northlanders swore to follow, is commanding you. Wait. The old vassal's face was ice-cold as he reprimanded them without even caring about even the slightest bit of paying respect to them. Archduke Trendita and Archduke Olsius' complexions turned frigid, whereas Archduke Lecco just looked pensive. Only Archduke Rockney, whose expression remained unchanged, sat at the left end of the long table. He appeared the same as when he first met Thales. Your Majesty, at least tell us your intentions behind this lame trap. A few seconds later, Archduke Lecco of Defense City let out a long, extended sigh and slowly sat down. Conspiring with this rascal from Constellation to taunt the Archdukes, Archduke Olsius also sat down in his own seat. He icily continued, saying, I feel like my dignity has been greatly compromised. At this moment, a wave of knocking sounds reverberated across the hall. Tap, tap, tap. The four archdukes collectively turned their heads towards the head of the table. Nuven VII had a stern expression on his face. He was knocking on the table steadily with his right hand. Tap, tap, tap. Thales narrowed his eyes. He noticed a unique-looking ring on King Nuven's right pinky. A black gemstone was embedded in the center of the silvery white metal ring. The king was nonchalantly knocking on the table with that very gemstone. Dignity does not give you the right to question your king, Rabian, King Nuven said in a steady voice. His gaze was locked on the table, as if he was particularly intrigued by the spot he was striking. There is only one thing you brats need to do, the same as it was a decade ago. Obey me. King Nuven gradually raised his head. A stern look radiated from his eyes, and it was a look that did not tolerate other opinions as he addressed the archdukes. Just as your forefathers obeyed my father a long time ago, and later on obeyed me. At least then, we lived together in harmony. Do you understand now? The archdukes held their breaths simultaneously. A few seconds later, Archduke Lecco sighed. He was the first to say, according to that boy, you used a lie to test our loyalty. We are now out of reach from our entourage and guards. This is really making me question my safety. Old bald man, if I really disregard the consequences and take your life, you think you can walk out of Heroic Spirit Palace, not to mention Dragon Cloud City, alive, plainly on the basis of those petty soldiers of that supreme axeman behind you? Lecco was stunned speechless as King Nuven abruptly raised his voice. This is not your defense city. The archdukes all frowned at the same time. Can you at least tell us what we're waiting for? Rockney brushed his long hair aside and snorted coldly. On the left of King Nuven stood another minister with a seemingly contemplative expression. With a meaningful yet smiling expression, he said, Your Excellencies, Archdukes, His Majesty has demonstrated extreme altruism. Please do not worry. However, if you are aware of each other's identity and duties, find yourself a seat and sit down properly. Nobody said a word. The hall suddenly sunk into a silent, purposeless wait. A good few minutes passed. Finally, the restless Thales rolled his eyes in embarrassment as he observed his surroundings. He caught the bearded Archduke's attention. With a violent expression on his face, Olsius cast his gaze upon Thales. In that instant, the others successively threw their gazes in his direction as well. Brat, I will dig your heart out after this. That's the price you will pay for taunting our dignity. Rockney, Lecco and Trendita all looked at him with varying expressions. There was alertness, thoughtfulness and also doubt. Thales closed his eyes and let out a long sigh. Damn it. I thought things would be really simple. Identify the mastermind and with a wave of King Nuven's hand, arrows will soar, vengeance will be taken. Then, I can just slip away and be done with it. But now, from the looks Olsius is giving me, the side effects and consequences seem grave. Your Excellency, just save some of your energy, Thales heard himself saying dispiritedly. There's no point in mentioning things you cannot fulfill in the first place. He no longer wanted to explain himself. Olsius gritted his teeth. Just as he was about to start speaking, yet another newcomer joined them in the meeting hall. Following the sound of cluttered footsteps, a young brunette appeared. He was clad in a heavy, long robe with a blood-red horseshoe embroidered on it. He walked into the crowded meeting hall. Escorted by his entourage, the Archduke of Beacon Illumination City, the young Concrete Pofret stood before the crowd. Thales took a deep breath and exhaled with a heavy sigh. Finally. Wonderful. Upon Pofret's arrival, Archduke Trendida's eyes lit up. He surveyed the people in the hall and revealed a big smile. Archduke Rockney was the only one scowling. Archduke Leko, on the other hand, looked surprised. Now, we're all here, the 5 archdukes invited here by your majesty, together all at once under the attentive watch of the White Blade Guards. The Archduke of Reformation Tower twitched his brows. Now, the question comes, what is it that you're planning to do? To wipe us all out by the ridiculous criminal charge of plotting a conspiracy, or? Trendida's voice abruptly stopped. The rest of his speech was cut off in his own throat like the sudden rupture of a bowstring. The Archduke of Reformation Tower stared blankly at Pofret's line of followers. His men were disheveled and empty-handed, they did not look good. The warrior next to Archduke Pofret himself had to be propped up. Blood flowed down between his fingers as the pale-faced warrior was held up by his shoulder. Around them, the cold glimmer of the White Blade Guards' unsheathed battle swords guarded them intently. The Star Killer, Nicholas, had a chilly air about him. He was the last to enter the hall and saluted the king once he was there. Trendita then came to his senses. Pofret and his men were disarmed as the White Blade Guards escorted them here. Archduke Pofret himself stood with a vacant look on his face. His body was still chilly as snow trickled from his brown hair. Are you done? The young Archduke raged. He raised his head to address the people. A noble Archduke should not be receiving such criminal treatment in the king's palace and castle. What exactly are you trying to do, forcing me to this meeting hall by military force? This is a challenge to our ancient Northland tradition, a disregard to Reikaru's joint pledge. King Nuvan squinted his eyes. The 4 archdukes had mixed expressions. In a hidden blind spot, Thales' brows twitched. It's finally ending tonight. Your Majesty, this is what you wanted us to wait for. To watch you utilize all means in gathering the 5 of us together. Archduke Leko looked at the disheveled Archduke Pofret. Indifferent, he grudgingly said, now, can you tell us the whys and wherefores of this already? Could it be, as the rascal mentioned, that we still have to wait for Lampod to come along? Olsius raged. Trendita let out a muffled laugh. Under everyone's gaze, the old king of Exted paused for 3 seconds before gradually saying, very well. King Nuvan folded his arms together. He looked stern as his eyes shot sharp rays across the room. But his following words surprised almost everyone. Little Thales, my clever guest. King Nuvan slowly turned to the side to look at Constellation's prince. Thales, who was prepared for a good show, got startled. What? Little Thales? Have we become this chummy now? Come, enlighten my loyal archdukes. Tell them why they're here. As his voice fell, a spark glimmered in his eyes. Tell them, the so-called truth. In that instant, there was a mixture of doubt, surprise and gloom in everybody's eyes. They turned towards the second prince of Constellation. Thales stood blankly in his place. Damn it. Thales reacted hastily and put on an ugly smile. He raised his arms and spread them out on both sides. I have no intention of embroiling myself into Exted's internal strife, your respected majesty. Thales smiled. Internal affairs are to be resolved by yourself. This is... He could not finish his speech. You have already been embroiled in it, Thales. Nuvan's deep, old voice, accompanied by his profoundly meaningful eyes, interrupted him. You involved yourself a long time ago. You cannot run now, future king of Constellation. And you promised to finish this for me. You gave your word, did you not? Thales gritted his teeth. The archdukes were looking at him and the doubt in their eyes slowly turned heavy. Thales swallowed and frowned. Nuvan, this damned old man. Does he intend to demonstrate to the archdukes that the successor of Constellation has stood by his side? Thales' brows were locked tighter together. King Nuvan's eyes sharpened. Go on, what are you waiting for, little prince? Olsius resumed his fierce glare at him. After fooling us with your ridiculous words, tell us the truth. I thought Lampod would show up just now. Thales ignored him. At the nudging of Putre's whispered reminder, he exhaled helplessly. All right. Thales finally stepped forward to meet the eyes of almost everyone in the hall. My apologies, your excellencies. Shouldering the unfriendly gazes of the 5 archdukes, Thales summoned up his courage and said, tonight, most the things I say will be fake, only one thing will be true. Price Mariah was assassinated in Constellation. Thales sighed, one of the masterminds behind it is among you. As soon as his words dropped, the 5 archdukes collectively scowled. The king's intimate vassal started whispering. The second prince ignored the noise, which erupted in the hall. King Nuvan had me find the culprit who worked with Lampod in the murder of Prince Mariah, Thales said expressionlessly. Hiya, I knew it, the bald Archduke Leko sighed. The purpose of inviting us over was not just to deal with the Prince of Constellation. Archduke Trentida turned his head and shook it disapprovingly. The culprit working with Lampard. Ha, I know now. But this wasn't exactly a good assignment. Thales turned to the 5 archdukes and nodded. Almost all 5 of you are suspects. The 5 archdukes turned their heads awkwardly to avoid the double line of sight from Thales and King Nuven. Reality has also proven that you indeed do not know your place. Thales laughed lightly and continued, frankly speaking, it really did not occur to me that those words could have lured the 4 of you here. I thought it would only be 2 of you at the most. My loyal archdukes, the joint rulers of Extit, it seems like you are all harboring great goals and ambition, King Nuven slowly said. Whispers and murmurs rang throughout the hall again. Ulcius and Leko's facial expression changed in embarrassment, while Rockney maintained his cold facade. Trentida giggled, whereas the young Pofred remained gloomy. King Nuven observed the floor silently with his hands folded together. So, since it is almost impossible to identify the culprit among the lot of you by acting according to customs, Thales sighed. I had to find another way out. I stopped investigating the suspects first. I decided to act from the reality of the matter, from how the murderer would act in accordance to the current situation. I see, so that's the case, Archduke Rockney of the city of Faraway Prayers said. Whatever you said previously was false. There's no such thing as a secret meeting between Dragon Cloud City and the Black Sand region. There is also no alliance between Walton and Lampard, correct? Thales shook his head. Of course not. I invented this crazy nonsense. His Majesty would never join forces with a blood enemy who murdered his kin. At the long table, a strange gleam flashed across King Nuven's eye. I got it, Archduke Leko mumbled. The key lies in Lampard, does it not? Because the so-called culprit who murdered Mariah secretly conspired with Lampard. HMPH, what a lousy scheme, trying to convince us and the culprit at the same time. Ulcius snorted, Lampard working together with His Majesty, leading him to think that Lampard would betray him and reveal his identity to His Majesty. The scheme was executed so bluntly. Archduke Trentida leaned back and laughed. Will someone actually be fooled by it? Thales stared at the 3 of them. His gaze wandered back and forth for a few seconds. Eventually, the second prince chuckled. No, Thales shook his head sternly, it is not that simple. Don't forget the words I've spoken to you, those about Lampard not being a murderer, but only being identified as one by the Secret Intelligence Department. Maybe the innocent archdukes would believe this, Thales continued resolutely, but only him, the culprit would not. As Lampard's accomplice, only he will know that Lampard was indeed one of the murderers. Lampard will never be cleared as a suspect in the prince's murder. It is then impossible for Lampard to be working with His Majesty, hence making it impossible for him to betray him. Only the culprit himself would know. Thales turned and looked around to assess the reactions to his speech. The so-called Walton and Lampard alliance I was talking about was just to alarm people. Lampard would never seek an alliance from His Majesty. Then, what did you actually mean that night? The bald Archduke Leko glared at him. You said a lot of things about how His Majesty would put hatred aside and favor his interests. If you cannot convince the murderer of the alliance between Lampard and His Majesty. I never prepared for him to believe it, Thales said fully. I only wanted to tell him, His Majesty suspects that Lampard was not the murderer and he is still attempting to contact Lampard. At the head of the long table, King Nuven let out a cold-blooded laugh. Moreover, if I had started this from when Nicholas picked me up, their liaison would have begun a long time ago. Archduke Ulcius impatiently said, you just said that Lampard was the murderer. He wouldn't have the guts or desire to work with His Majesty. And, you haven't been able to draw out the name of the culprit from Lampard. I wasn't finished. Through King Nuven's investigation, we also realized one key point. Thales interrupted him ruthlessly, startling Ulcius. The culprit also did something else. He also participated in my attempted murder, the assassination of Constellation's prince. The whispers in the hall ceased instantly. While Broken Dragon Fortress and Lampard played their little games, he bribed an organization called the Disaster Sword. They utilized Lampard's mystic gun unit to murder me in an attempt to frame Lampard. Thales took a deep breath and said each word severely. This is what I wanted him to know. I want to let the culprit know that His Majesty, King Nuven is now aware that the murderer of Prince Mariah is the same person who framed Lampard. Behind Thales, Poutre sighed. Marquis Shiles, however, stood smiling by his side. Thales just shrugged. At the end of the day, amid all the nonsense I told you this evening, I only wanted to make 2 points. 1. His Majesty is contacting Lampard. 2. His Majesty knows that Prince Mariah's murderer is also plotting against Lampard. Under everyone's doubtful gaze, Thales slowly nodded his head. If that's the case, it doesn't matter if His Majesty is able to work with Lampard anymore. What's important is that when His Majesty contacts him to confirm Mariah's murder, will he also reveal this fact to Lampard? The archdukes were instantly shaken. They now understood the causes and effects of this incident. And this is very possible. After all, just as I have theorized, His Majesty, King Nuven has already contacted the Black Sand region through Nicholas. In the face of such a possibility, the culprit who has murdered His Majesty's son and betrayed Lampard would surely be quaking in his boots by now. In order to gain Lampard's trust, would His Majesty reveal the fact that the person who framed him is the same person who murdered Mariah? And Lampard just so happens to be the one who knows the truth behind the murder of Prince Mariah, and the identity of the culprit. Therefore, the key does not lie with His Majesty, but with Lampard himself. Thales gauged everyone's reaction and released a deep sigh. If the king does not mention it, then he will be considered lucky. But how long will this luck last? Will this matter be mentioned in the next correspondence? If the king mentions it, then Chapman Lampard will know that his accomplice stationed a traitor within the Black Sand Region Army, and framed him for crime in Broken Dragon Fortress. That is betrayal. In that moment, if I were Lampard, the first thing I would do is reveal the culprit's identity to His Majesty. Thales' eyes shone with certainty as he spoke firmly. By the hands of the Dragon Spear family, let this preposterous betrayer and accomplice pay the heftiest price in Dragon Cloud City. Upon hearing that, King Nuvan suddenly threw his head back in laughter. His laughter grew louder as time went by. Conversely, everyone else in the meeting hall remained speechless. In silence, they watched as the king laughed. Once King Nuvan stopped laughing, he cast his gaze on the archdukes, one of them specifically. Go on. At this point, King Nuvan's eyes were piercing as he stared at the speechless archduke. His elderly voice now clouded with a murderous intent. We are all looking forward to it. Thales turned around and nodded at the old king. He breathed out through his nose and raised his head. Once that happens, the culprit's identity and misdoings will never be concealed from Lampard and His Majesty's eyes. The thought of Archduke Lampard revealing his identity and crimes through their correspondence. The thought of how his every minute in Dragon Cloud City increased his chances of exposure. The thought of King Nuvan's inability to vent the raging fire of his vengeance. Thales strolled towards the center of the hall. He sighed and looked at the outstanding archduke. How could you sit still, eat well, or even sleep well? How could you not flee to your own territory and pray for safety within its secure walls? The 5 archdukes displayed various expressions on their faces. But the 4 of them had their knowing gazes cast on the one archduke who had always stood out from the beginning. So, this is how it is, Thales slowly said as he adjusted his line of sight to look at this person. When they first met in the very same meeting hall, this person was kind, fair and passionate. Tonight, he did not say a word, he only replied with silence. It was the youngest archduke, who had a crimson horseshoe embroidered on his robes. With a friendly smile, Thales said, His Majesty, Lampard and my mutual rival, the murderer of Prince Mariah, my attempted murderer, Lampard's accomplice and betrayer. The banquet was going swell, and the palace as well as city gates were open for the first time. I suggested such a brilliant proposal and awaited your arrival. Can you tell me why, at 4 in the morning, before the light of dawn even filled the sky? You could not even make it for a goodbye, but hurried to leave Heroic Spirit Palace. You ascended onto your carriage and galloped towards the city gate without a care for Dragon Cloud City. Thales shook his head and with mixed feelings, he read out the culprit's name, Your Excellency, the respected Archduke of Beacon Illumination City, Concret Pofret. By this time, the hall was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then, the young brunette, whose identity was being celebrated, looked up. His body was covered in chills and snow as he looked at the Prince of Constellation. There was only numbness in his eyes. Chapter 147 The Northland Road. The archdukes, the devoted vassals by the king's side, even the White Blade Guards and regular Heroic Spirit Palace guards were all staring intently at Archduke Pofret in the meeting hall. Among them all, King Nuvan's stare was particularly terrifying. He was like the ferocious human devouring dragon of legends. Archduke Pofret's entourage were pale. Many of them raised their heads as if they were meeting for the first time. Their eyes were filled with shock and astonishment as they looked at their master in disbelief. Thales, who was observing all of this, sighed softly. Sometimes, it is not a good thing to be in such a rush. In the face of it all, the young Archduke Pofret just pursed his lips and said nothing. The commander of the White Blade Guards and the Star Killer, Nicholas, was behind him. He stared coldly at the Archduke, his eyes full of disdain. Apart from that, when our men stationed at the city gate flagged them down. This group from Beacon Illumination City did not intend to respond peacefully. They immediately drew their swords instead. Nicholas's voice grew fainter as more and more people grew restless. That was until I personally slaughtered that supreme-class fellow. Pofret's entourage from Beacon Illumination City exchanged unpleasant looks. They gritted their teeth and looked down. Concret, you, Archduke Olsius looked at Archduke Pofret in a daze. I thought Beacon Illumination City was the closest in terms of distance, and also Dragon Cloud City's most trusted right hand. Obviously, reality is somewhat different from our assumptions. Next to him, Trendita exhaled. Take a guess, how will tonight end? Right on time, the king's voice rang. End. Nuvan VII sneered in a terrifying manner. His eyes were locked on the silent Pofret. Believe me, everyone. Tonight's outcome will be very terrible. No one answered. Still, Archduke Pofret bowed his head without a word. Bam. With a severely bitter expression, Archduke Rockney resolutely slapped his palm on the table. The impact echoed throughout the hall. Rockney raised his head and addressed all the archdukes. His voice was laced with disappointment and fury. We're Northlanders, not conspiring, murdering citizens of the Southern Empire. Thales curled his lips and whispered, thanks for the compliment. Now that this is all out, I must say, it really came as a surprise to me. Archduke Trendy's eyes exuded a slight slyness and playfulness. Our little guest from Constellation, are you really only 7 years old? Olsius stared at Thales disdainfully. Little vipers have a special sensitivity towards conspiracy. Thales took a deep breath. Conspiracy, no, he secretly said in his heart. From the assassination of the extant diplomat group to the Battle of Constellation and the Dragon, from the battle for Broken Dragon Fortress to the mystic gun that shot me, from Lampod to Pofret, all the dots are starting to connect. Just in time, a wave of fluctuations rushed up his brain, allowing Thales to think more rapidly and clearly. All the different elements and events lined up clearly in front of him like the old times. This is not just a simple conspiracy, Thales heard himself say. A lot of things have happened at the end of this year. The second prince of Constellation closed his eyes as he straightened things out in his head. For Extit, nothing can surpass the murder of Prince Mariah in Constellation. However, that was not an isolated incident. It's part of a terrifying chain of conspiracies that stretch across the southern peninsula's two strongest countries. Scenes of the past resurfaced. The Duke of the Northern Territory's sinister expression. King Kessel's unsuppressed roar. The mixed gazes from the Dukes of Constellation. The Archduke of the Black Sand region and his expressionless eyes. Nuvan VII's despair. And now, the Extichans in heroic spirit palace. Thales gradually reopened his eyes and they were filled with a sense of heaviness. This strategy ingeniously utilized the long-standing relationship between the two countries. And, it was inflated by the garrison contract, bilateral conflict and hatred that has been accumulating for several decades. The executor of this strategy would mold himself into a sharp blade for both countries in an attempt to revamp the structure on each side during unrest. This would in effect, reshape the situation in the entire West Peninsula. Everyone in the Hall of Heroes had their eyes locked on the Prince of Constellation, even their breathing slowed down. Behind Thales, the vice diplomat of Constellation, Putre Nemane was the only one who frowned slightly. It looked as if he was worried about something. First, he would murder Prince Mariah within the borders of Constellation. That would spark a war between Constellation and Extit. During the internal strife between the Jadestar royal family and noblemen of Constellation, both parties would suffer without victory. King Kessel would have to sadly step down in defeat and condemnation. With the support of the people and glory of defeating Extit, the Guardian Duke of the Northern Territory, Valorund would then take over authority and the royal crown of the Supreme King of Constellation. Thales lowered his head and described it all plainly as though it had nothing to do with him. Just a butterfly's wings, this is just the one side involving Constellation. As for the one in Extit, Archduke Pofret unwittingly clenched his fists. Thales' voice continued indistinctly. The passing of Prince Mariah would strip the Walton family of their hope in crowning a new king, transforming King Nuvan's rage into a war-instigating fertilizer. In the name of seeking vengeance for the king, Archduke Lampod would rashly send troops out. In the midst of chaos, coupled with the cooperation of an insider, Lampod would successfully conquer the northern territory of Constellation, achieving unprecedented prestige and gain. Finally, the Archduke of the Black Sand region would return with the glory of battle and overwhelming prestige. He would then be successfully crowned as the common elected king. Once the plan is completed, Constellation and the Dragon would have their masters replaced amid their hatred towards each other, and the nations would be born anew. Thales paused for a while and finished with, an elaborate, grand, risky, ambitious, and creative as well as courageous strategy. The 5 archdukes exuded mixed feelings. Rockney had a heavy expression on his face and Olsius thought about what Thales said in shock, while Trenita glanced at the others in the hall, looking askance. The old, bald Lecco just blinked, his expression indistinguishable. Archduke Pofret's breathing grew heavier. A young man with so many thoughts and so much ambition, Archduke Lecco's cloudy eyeballs twitched as he said to Pofret, but going out of your way to kill the Prince of Constellation has exposed you instead. Pofret did not answer him. Instead, he just looked at the ground transfixed, as if everything around him did not exist at all. I think he did not go out of his way, he did not have a choice. Thales raised his eyebrows. It just occurred to me just now, the scene of my murder in front of the fortress was to completely destroy Lampod. Archduke Lecco turned towards him. According to the original plan, Lampod would claim the throne to become King Chapman. I do not know the generation count for this name. But you, Archduke Pofret, are Extit's most secret ally. Pofret finally raised his head, but he was not facing anybody in particular. The problem is, this plan had already failed from the start. Thales sighed. Prince Mariah was murdered, but Constellation's insider failed. My appearance denied the Duke of the Northern Territory any provocation of war as planned. He frowned as he recalled all kinds of things in Renaissance Palace, as well as Sonia and Araka in the fortress. Lampard also failed to gather the forces of the three southern archdukes to invade Constellation. Needless to say, he could not take down Broken Dragon Fortress. The war between Constellation and the dragon was simply not possible. Count Lampard could not achieve the glory of conquering the northern territory of Constellation to retrieve the highly aspired crown. Archduke Pofred exhaled ever so slightly and a low gasp for breath was heard. Even more terrifying, with the defeat of Valorund in Constellation, Chapman Lampard's conspiracy was exposed. Thales forced a smile. The raging King Nuven would seek his vengeance, and Lampard as well as the Black Sand region would pay the price. Ah, exactly, King Nuven added without a care. At the end of the long table, he caressed a black ring on his finger. The archdukes exchanged glances. Thales nodded. Hence, Lampard was destined to be finished. His Majesty, Nuven and Dragon Cloud City will not let him go. Under the watch of the archdukes, he gestured towards the expressionless Pofred. If Lampard was really forced to his wit's end, how could his accomplice be fine alone? Judging from Lampard's character, he would certainly drag his accomplice to hell with him. Thales shook his head. For his own survival, Archduke Pofred had to act fast in eliminating previous accomplices and potential ones. The long-haired Rockney snorted. If the Prince of Constellation had died in the Black Sand region, Lampard's reputation would have been smeared with his blood. Thales walked back to Poutre's side and sneered. As for the throne of Constellation, even before King Nuven can act, the Dukes of Constellation would have come in droves, tearing Lampard and the Black Sand region into pieces. I think the other archdukes would be happy to see that happen too. Then, you would be completely safe. The voice of the Prince of Constellation dropped. In the hall, many people released sighs of different intents. There was everything from deliberation to pity, grief, dissatisfaction and wrath. At the next second, the young Archduke Pofred finally turned around. His eyes were no longer gentle and friendly as he glared at Thales up and down. He then resumed his stare at Nuven VII, who was sitting at the end of the table in front of him. Clap, clap, clap. A slow, rhythmic applause began to sound from the end of the long table. King Nuven had started applauding, but remained expressionless. Nobody joined him. Our guests from Constellation deserve an applause, the old king applauded as he spoke in a disturbing rhythm and tone. Thales rolled his eyes begrudgingly. He could feel all the eyes on him. Their stares were heavy with deliberation and fear. You too, ally of the Walton family, leader of the Pofred family, my most trusted Archduke of Beacon Illumination City, Concrete Pofred. The eyes of the common elected King of Exted and Archduke of Beacon Illumination City finally met. One side was filled with complexity and rage, while the other was numb and indifferent. Say something, Concrete, before you can no longer speak. King Nuven's voice was heavy and stifled. It echoed in the fire-lit meeting hall, giving people a sense of suffocation. At the very least, you can try choosing your own method of execution. All of a sudden, Archduke Pofred raised the corner of his mouth. It revealed a shady, yet terrifying smirk. Method of execution, he murmured. With a face of concern, a disarmed subordinate behind Pofred whispered, Sir, maybe we should. The next moment, Pofred turned around. He had furious expression on his face as he spoke coldly to his subordinate, Shut up. His follower began to slow down in his speech before he sighed and stopped talking. Pofred turned back. As his face twitched, he gritted his teeth. His expression successively changed between dissatisfaction and fury. HMPH, the young Archduke sneered. You want me to say something? His laughter extended further. Thales scowled, while King Nuven's expression remained unchanged. Ha ha ha, what else can I say? Pofred shook his head sarcastically. A moment later, he suddenly turned around. His eyes were sharp like a falcon's as he swept his gaze across the hall. I do not know what you are talking about. Pofred's indifferent words caused a change in everyone's expressions. I received an invitation from His Majesty to come to Dragon Cloud City on the basis of a discussion regarding bilateral issues. Pofred addressed the crowd with a sneer and reached his hand out to Thales. Then, the common elected king, whom I respect the most, the one I cannot say no to, formed an alliance with the enemy's prince, the one he has a deep-seated vendetta against. All that to accuse me of being the murderer of Prince Mariah. And the reason, with a fierce expression, Pofred jerked his head back, causing Thales to jump in surprise. Just because I wanted to leave the banquet early. Because I wanted to rush back to my own territory. Because my people in the White Blade Guards had an unnecessary conflict in the middle of the night. I even had to sacrifice a supreme class guard. Pofred gasped for air as he firmly beat his chest. Such shameless slander. Screw you, Pofred, one of the vassals by the king's side spat. That's a coward's defense. Hey, this is truly unlike the Concrete I once knew. This day has been really full of surprises. Archduke Trentida squinted his eyes and laughed. We have heard the child's words and seen your reaction. At this point, is there a need to quibble? Olsius tightened his brows. Don't forget, you're a Northlander. Quibble. Pofred raised his voice as he asked. His eyes widened and it made him look insane. From the very beginning until now, this damn rascal has only been spouting nonsense. Pofred pointed at Thales and roared. And all you idiots have been made a fool by this one prince of constellation, the scum of the empire. Thales shrugged in resignation as he and Poutre exchanged glances. Marquis Shiles cheerfully whispered, "Wow, being able to witness this in the royal court of Extit, it is indeed a show worth the expenses of a return trip." Pauffret turned around and out of humiliation, he looked at King Nuven angrily. "I murdered Prince Mariah. I collaborated with Lampod. I led the assassination of this rascal." The Archduke's face twisted as he yelled in fury. "Is there any evidence? Everyone knows that I'm about the same age as Mariah. We were on friendly terms, what reason do I have to murder him?" The young Archduke's words caused everyone to look at him askance and frown. They started whispering among themselves. "As you said, Archduke Olsius, the Pauffret family is the strongest ally of the Walton family." Upon watching Archduke Pauffret's actions, King Nuven kept silent. Nonetheless, his eyes grew colder. "And you, your majesty," the benevolent yet muddle-headed Nuven VII wished to finish me right here. Pauffret yelled at everyone, based on this ridiculous, absurd accusation because I wanted to return to my territory. Just because of the nonsense spouted by this damn brat. Archduke Pauffret gasped heavily, he raised his right index finger and gritted his teeth. "If I die here, the Pauffret family will not forget about it. Beacon Illumination City will not forget. Northland will not forget." Amid the frowning crowd, he roared in insanity. "Everyone will know about the king who cut off his descendants, that Walton went mad from despair. He believed in treachery as well as his enemies and he persecuted his loyal vassals and friends. Without reason, proof or justification, he accused me, his archduke. Then, he publicly slaughtered me in Dragon Cloud City. Everyone will know that this is a violation of Reikaru's joint pledge." The other archdukes watched his act silently. A sense of grief leaked from their eyes. Pauffret adjusted his breath and threatened with his words, "After I die, my brother will inherit the archduke's position. As for Dragon Cloud City, the Pauffret family will." But just then, King Nuven applauded again. He startled Pauffret as he interrupted his speech. "Not a bad attempt." King Nuven's old, heavy voice contained an intense chill. "I always thought you were a polite sissy. I've underestimated you. It appears that you are not a bad actor. Do try attending Dragon Kiss Academy or Dark Knight Temple, just not here." "PFF, this is just your well-calculated scheme to cast me to my death and cripple the Archduke's powers," Archduke Pauffret fiercely replied. "Do you have any other evidence besides assumptions and slander?" King Nuven sneered. "Of course, maybe you've lost all sense of reasoning for a long time. You do not care about evidence, or the identity of the murderer. You just want to cripple the powers of us archdukes." Pauffret raised both arms and flaunted his chest. He gritted his teeth as he stared intently at the king. "What are you waiting for? Come, kill me now. Show the extensions the true colors of their king. When I get to Hell's River, I will tell Mariah that his father went insane after his death, the Walton family died out in this generation." Pauffret gnashed his teeth and enunciated each word. Bam. Upon hearing the name of his deceased son, King Nuven slammed his fist on the table. Pauffret ignored him. "The rest of you sitting in on this trial without evidence, all of you witnessing this will be next." Pauffret turned around and swept his gaze across all the other archdukes. His eyes burned with rage. Rockney shook his head in disdain as disgust seeped through his eyes. Bowl-cut Trentita smiled at his best friend, with his smile revealing 8 teeth in the process. Olsius on the other hand, watched the young archduke, feeling speechless. Archduke Lecco did not even raise his head. It looked like he was particularly interested in the long table before his eyes. The king's devoted vassals and advisors also appeared as though they were deep in thought. They were not the only ones who sensed a problem. Thales, who was spectating, also frowned a little. Although Pauffret seems to be using a quibble as his final struggle, he isn't being unreasonable. An archduke comes all the way to Dragon Cloud City, but gets executed by the king. What will the people think? How will Beacon Illumination City react? Are the archdukes indifferent about this? Plus, although everyone knows it's Pauffret, there is indeed no evidence. Unless Lampod comes forward to plead guilty and identify Pauffret. Thales' concerned eyes paced between Pauffret's taut expression and the old king's severe one. What now? The king will recklessly execute. While everyone was focused on their thoughts, King Nuven finally spoke up. Evidence. The old king looked up and bellowed, "Ha ha ha ha." Pauffret was a little startled and the archdukes looked at him in bewilderment. "When did I start requiring evidence?" Nuven VII slowly raised his voice, "All I need is reason and the truth." Pauffret exhaled through his nose and sneered. "HMPH, a typical tyrant. Reikaru will be ashamed of you." He squinted. "The vices of this empire have resurfaced in you. Maybe this is Reikaru." King Nuven did not let him finish. The old king clenched his right fist and snorted. Before Reikaru Extit's death, his nephew cum successor, the future Nuven Walton I stood before his bed. Under the witness of the Queen of the Sky, he pledged his oath as a successor to humanity's hero. The final sentence of his pledge became the family motto of the Dragon Spear family. Under the scrutiny of the occupants of the hall, Nuven VII lowered his voice. He solemnly said, "That's right, for the children of Northland, take the Northland road." Archduke Pofred was alarmed and this revealed his doubts. King Nuvan clenched his fists tightly as rays of fury projected from his eyes. Yet, he suppressed his emotions and continued solemnly, "Since we are Northlanders, it is time to take the Northland road." Everyone's expression collectively changed. Thales thought of a possibility and his face paled. King Nuvan clapped his hands once more and two sets of footsteps could slowly be heard outside the hall. Everyone's eyes were engaged by the shadows of the two newcomers. Thales identified the newcomers, scowling as he looked at Putre. Putre narrowed his eyes instead, and shook his head slightly. Pofret stared at the newcomers in a daze. "Come, meet our dear officer of intelligence." King Nuvan raised his hand as he introduced them. Madame Kalshan. Under Thales' heavy gaze, an old grandmother whom he had met before smiled gently and greeted the archdukes. The arrival of the Red Witch, the master of the secret room, caused the archdukes to frown. What is the meaning of this? Regardless of people's looks, the king pointed at a veiled woman wearing a silver-white robe. He coldly said, "And also the head priestess of Bright Moon Temple, Jupulholm." Thales was stunned. He saw the symbol on the other party's body. It was a pair of moons embedded together. One of it was a crescent moon, while the other was a full moon. The head priestess of Bright Moon Temple. Priestess Holm was expressionless. It was as if everything around her did not concern her. However, neither the archdukes nor the king expressed any indignation, as though that was how things were supposed to be in the first place. Thales could not help but recall the Sunset Temple of Constellation and that head ritual master, Lissa. Gods. What exactly are the roles they play in this world? What is the meaning of this? Pofred expressed a gloominess as he stared intently at the king. What does this mean? The elderly King Nuvan sneered and slammed his palm on the table. Naturally, Her Excellency, Priestess Holm is here as a witness. It is also nightfall, so there is no better witness than the bright moon goddess herself. Pofred could seemingly guess by then. The young archduke felt his throat dry up as he hoarsely said, "Witness, witness what? Witness what?" The old king revealed a threatening smile and turned to the Prince of Constellation. "Little Thales, watch carefully." Thales was surprised. He slowly recovered from his own thoughts. Ancient Northland ceremonies cannot be proposed casually. In order to achieve effectiveness, it requires a sufficient number of witnesses, sufficient sacred rituals and the witness of arbitrators, King Nuvan plainly said. Ancient Northland ceremonies. Thales looked at the elderly Nuvan VII in a daze, feeling shocked for a moment. It cannot be. Could it be that? The archdukes and vassals looked equally astonished. Many of them even had panic in their eyes. "Your Majesty," a nobleman, who appeared to be an administrative minister, began to speak. But Nuvan VII did not give them any opportunities to ask questions. The next moment, King Nuvan's right palm shook as he slapped it against the chair. Bam! Everyone jumped in shock. Extit's old, nearly 70-year-old king suddenly got up. With a face full of hatred and murderous intent, he spoke the following words in his old, thunderous voice: "I, Nuvan Rikaru Khan Walton, the 7th Nuvan in the genealogy of common elected kings. King of Dragon Knights and hero Rikaru, the successor of Chara the hero. Suzerain of the Northlanders of the Western Peninsula, the officer guarding the perimeter of the glaciers. The guardian of the Northlanders, conqueror of the White Mountain. The arbitrator of the Golden Corridor, as well as the conqueror of Broken Dragon Fortress. The 45th common elected king of the Extit Empire and Glacier Queeker's 45th Archduke of Dragon Cloud City." With the Bright Moon Goddess spokesperson at this imperial conference, witnessed by the Archduke of Prestige Orchid, Archduke of Reformation Tower, Archduke of the City of Faraway Prayers, Archduke of Defense City and the sole successor of Constellation. Not knowing what to do, Thales watched the king's actions vacantly. Equally shocked were the archdukes, including Pofred himself. The king continued to speak, his words laced with a chilling rage and pain. "For my son, the last successor of the Walton family in Dragon Cloud City, Mariah Bertrand Nuvan Walton, for the despicable murder he encountered. In the name of the glorious traditions of Northland, and vengeance by a blood relative, I order that you participate in a sacred duel. Concrete Pofred of Beacon Illumination City." The elderly king's words were resolute. Looking at the young, dazed archduke, he spat out these final words: "This duel has been ordered in the name of the king. You have no option but to accept." Chapter 148. I am watching you, I have warned you. The king finished speaking. The meeting hall was filled with stony silence. For a period of time, there was only the hissing, cracking sound of flames in the braziers, and the irregular breathing of the people around him. Almost everyone was stunned by the king's announcement in that instant. They remained speechless for 5 seconds, until a childish voice belonging to a boy broke the silence. What the actual hell? All the attention, including King Nuvan's profound gaze, was directed to the Prince of Constellation, Thales Jadastar. He was standing in a corner with a flabbergasted expression on his face. Putre faked a cough behind the prince, and the dazed Thales then realized what he had done. He quickly flashed an apologetic, awkward smile. Nevertheless, no one minded a foreign prince's gaffe at the moment. The tall Archduke Rockney stood up abruptly, and with a grim expression, said what had been on his fellow Archdukes' minds, "Your Majesty, please reconsider your decision. This is not just about your family's vengeance, but also the future of Extit." The members of the Imperial Conference by the king's side were also panicking. The face of the administrator behind him darkened by the seconds. It was Lord Merk. He tried to whisper something into King Nuven's ear, but the latter merely gave him a wave of dismissal. His actions shut Merk and his close vassals up instantly. "This is my decision," the king softly said to his close vassals. At that very moment, the thought of King Nuven's old and frail figure somehow overlapping with the robust silhouette in Renaissance Palace suddenly crossed Thales' mind. Thales also noticed that among the people in the hall, there were only two who appeared unfazed. The head of the White Blade Guards as well as Starkiller wore a blank expression on his face, and the Red Witch Calcian, head of the secret room, still smiled in a kind and gentle fashion. As for the newly arrived High Priestess of Bright Moon Temple, Jupwelholm, Thales could not even see her face underneath her veil. "How old is King Nuven this year?" Thales turned his head around to ask Poutre in a whisper. 69, if I remember correctly," answered Marquis Shiles Bamra, who was beside Poutre. The guest from Camus frowned. On the other hand, Lord Poffret is 33, still at the prime of his youth. "Damn it, we just signed a mining contract with Extit. This situation is out of control. Be on your guard, Your Highness." Poutre appeared worried and conflicted. "If King Nuven insists on having a duel..." Thales nodded with a solemn look. He knew what Poutre meant. If King Nuven died here, the anchor of peace between the Jadestars and Waltons would cease to exist. And he, the Prince of Constellation, would also lose his only ally in Dragon Cloud City, in Extit. Besides, the Archduke's attitudes towards him were not exactly friendly, particularly Lord Poffret, who apparently hated his guts. Thales gritted his teeth. Meanwhile, King Nuven left his seat. He walked forward, and beamed at the Archdukes. "What is wrong, O noble and prideful Rockney?" The king's aged, but thunderous voice boomed across the spacious hall. "Are you afraid that I, an old bat, cannot defeat a young man?" The long-haired Archduke did not reply, however his answer was obvious from his light head shake. "I do not think it is an unsound concern, Your Majesty." Archduke Trendita rubbed his right hand with a grim look and glanced at the puzzled Archduke Poffret. "Trying to fight a young man for women is one thing, a duel is an entirely different matter. You are aware of your age, are you not, Your Majesty?" Archduke Olsius was even more straightforward. "Arresting him would be a much better choice. Are you aware of the consequences?" "This is the consequence." Nuven raised his voice, roaring at the room of people where all eyes were trained on him. "This is the consequence one must bear when a member of the Walton family is harmed in any way." Everyone in the hall instantly got a fright. This is not good. Thales watched their interaction with worry. Has Nuven VII been driven mad by impulse and hatred? The old king's enraged gaze swept past the three archdukes. "You know very well, if anyone angers the Dragon Spear family, he or she must pay the price. The Waltons are willing to put everything at stake for revenge. That is who we are." The three archdukes were dumbfounded. Their expressions changed. Under the king's menacing gaze, they turned their heads away and said nothing more. They were like lionesses that submitted to the leader of the pride. But something doesn't feel right. This was what Thales had realized. This is not just about irrational vengeance, he thought. This is a warning from the king, from Dragon Cloud City, from the Walton family. "Ha ha," Archduke Lecco laughed awkwardly. He was the oldest among them and he was seated farther away from them. "Our king certainly likes to joke, doesn't he?" King Nuven turned his head and cast him a glance. The smile on Archduke Lecco's face froze, although he did not seem to notice it. "Joke." King Nuven snorted, shuffling towards Poffret. His eyes seemed to burn with endless fury. "What do you think, Concret Poffret? Do I look like I am joking?" All eyes were upon Archduke Poffret, who had been challenged. You are insane. A duel." The young Archduke was confounded. He scrutinized the old and ailing King Nuven from head to toe. His lips quivered as he mumbled, "In the name of revenge, you would even risk your own life." But he was interrupted by King Nuven. "Why are you so surprised?" The old king said coldly. "It is your best and only chance. If you kill me, you do not have to face the consequences of your crime. All the charges against you will be dropped." Poffret jumped. He raised his head and stared at the king. "Of course, you may also admit defeat right at the start of the duel and admit to your crimes," Nuven said, smiling coldly. His eyes were shimmering with hatred. Without waiting for Poffret's response, the king turned around to face the other four archdukes. "Is this not the result you anticipate the most?" King Nuven roared like a wrathful dragon. "If I die here, all of you can save the time you spent plotting petty schemes, no?" The archdukes all froze. The king looked across the room full of people as he cackled away. "Then, Extit will see that another king selection is done. A hurried one, perhaps. But, it is also your chance to ascend to the throne and rule the kingdom." He narrowed his eyes. "That is very close at hand, is it not?" The archdukes remained quiet. Everyone in the room stayed idle and their breathing became heavy. You are the king, Archduke Rockney sighed, you make the decision. King Nuvan replied with a hearty laugh. He then whipped around to face the High Priestess of Bright Moon Temple. High Priestess Holm. The veiled High Priestess responded with a slight nod and lifted her arms solemnly. Her left hand held onto her right elbow, while her right palm was open and facing up. It looked like she was carrying a plate. High Priestess Holm closed her eyes and lowered her head as everyone watched her in grim silence. Suddenly, Thales heard a peculiar ringing in his ears. Thales jolted. He had experienced it before back in the Hall of Stars, in front of the ritual master of Sunset Temple, Lissa during the Bloodline ceremony. This time though, he felt much better. At least this time, he did not have as intense a reaction as last time. Perhaps, he was bound to be affected by every holy ritual connected to the gods. As Thales stayed composed, feeling fortunate for how well he was feeling, he heard a voice amid the ringing in his ears. I am watching you. Thales looked up swiftly, but all he could see was the blank ceiling. What? Perplexed, he glanced around to only see a room full of stone-faced people, waiting for the ritual to end. Poutre and Shiles appeared equally somber behind him. No one spoke. What was that? Thales scratched his head in confusion. He continued to scan the room. Seeing that nothing stood out, he heaved a helpless sigh. Fine, if I'm hearing things, something is wrong with my ears, I need to see a doctor. I have warned you. Thales felt a jolt running through his body. Instinctively, he turned and nervously looked around the hall again. It happened again. Who? Who is it? It was real. He was certain that someone was speaking to him. It was like a whisper into his ear. Thales could not recall how the voice sounded like, but the words were clear as day. Could it be, he thought in a panic, Yodel, the elusive masked protector? No, impossible. This voice, it's completely different from Yodel's raspy voice. Thales was feeling rather jittery. Once he was sure that no one here had spoken, he cast his disbelieving gaze to the High Priestess of Bright Moon Temple, who had both her eyes closed. It can't be. Thales' odd behavior had drawn the attention of a few others. Shiles looked at him curiously while Poutre scowled, as though he was chastising him. Realizing this, Thales was shocked. He immediately turned around and stood properly with a serious expression. The strange ringing eventually faded. Nevertheless, Thales' bewilderment and anxiety continued to rise. The bright moon hath answered. High Priestess Holm opened her clear, serene eyes. The goddess doth not opposed. Most people in the hall sighed, but the Archduke said nothing. As it appears, a duel is bound to take place, the High Priestess said in a deep voice. And I shall be the goddess, witness. There was no further objection. The old king flashed a contented smile and averted his gaze back to his opponent. In the still silence, Archduke Pofred gradually regained his composure and calmed his rapid breathing. He stared at King Nuvan and his eyes glimmered with an odd emotion. Ha, very well, there was a peculiar smile on the young Archduke's face. That is your proposal, is it not? To challenge me to a duel in the name of the king, I have no right and no intention to turn it down. Pofred lifted his chin, revealing his baleful glare. What are we waiting for then? King Nuvan gave a wide grin too. His eyes shone with a blinding spark. However, Thales in the meantime, felt utterly perplexed. I am watching you. I have warned you. What does it all mean? Thales forced his emotions down and tried not to think about the strange voice he heard. He shook his head, as though doing so could fling those words out of his mind. He had enough troubles for now. He needed to sort them out one at a time. Thales looked up at the white blade guards as they moved the long, heavy table from the middle of the hall. The crowd cleared out a space for the duel as well. Following the others as they retreated near the braziers in the corner, Thales realized that there were about 5 or 6 flights of stairs on the sides of the oval-shaped Hall of Heroes. The center of the hall was empty. Based on memory fragments of Thales' past life, it looked like a coliseum. A thought suddenly then appeared in his head. Is it possible that this meeting hall in Heroic Spirit Palace was built for a duel? Is it luck or misfortune? Poutre snorted. During your first visit to Extat, you get to witness a rare duel. Thales grimaced. Must the king go into the arena himself? During the age of the Empire, the participants could request someone to fight on their behalf, Poutre whispered. But, we are now in Northland, the Northland after the fall of the Empire no less. One must fight their own fights, even the king's. I've heard a thing or two about Northland duels, but, Marquis Shiles, who stood beside them sighed. This is my first time seeing this. God, a 70-year-old king versus a 30-year-old archduke. No matter what the outcome is, I can tell this story over and over again for a year when I get home. Is a duel a rare occasion? Is this not what the king selection requires? I thought the archdukes who want to become king would prepare for duels. Thales asked. A king selection duel will only occur when 2 parties get the same number of votes. It is carried out to determine the final winner. This has not happened for a long time. Poutre shook his head. Reportedly, during the King Selection Congress 30 years ago, Nuvan VII had gotten the support from all 6 archdukes. There was no need for a duel. I heard that Count Lampard of Black Sand region defeated his older brother in a duel and obtained the right of inheritance. Is it true? Thales asked with a sullen expression as he watched the two men in the arena take off their robes. He could see Lord Merc preparing the arena in a gloomy manner. Poutre nodded. That duel made him known across the whole nation, and even Constellation, Poutre said grimly. It is rare for Extit to have such a vicious, terrifying and bloodthirsty suzerain with passionate followers. Lampard was assigned important roles afterwards, and he went on a diplomatic mission to Constellation. But the other suzerains are wary of him since he is a cold-blooded man. He was able to bring himself to kill his own brother after all. Marquis Shiles pursed his lips. This is all I know about Northland after traveling to all the cities in the north. That aside, the decision for this duel is too rushed, or all the Northlanders insane. Thales gritted his teeth. Has he not thought of the consequences of his defeat? Suddenly, a cold voice made itself heard. In Northland, a duel is a sacred ritual. Star Killer, Nicholas, appeared out of nowhere and stood beside them. His eyes were fixed on the two men on the arena. It is a way to prove whether you are a devious, selfish coward who hides behind your army and guards, or a powerful, brave warrior who would risk your life for the goal in your heart. Thales sighed and shrugged. Standing in the center of the hall, King Nuven was only dressed in a combat cloak with tight sleeves. The cloak was embroidered with the Cloud Dragon spear emblem and the sleeves allowed him great mobility. The same could be said for Pofret, whose left sleeve was sewn with an image of the blood shoe. The duel is my idea. As for the weapon, you may decide. King Nuven eyed Pofret closely. Pofret took a deep breath and hesitated for a few seconds. The battle axe. The young Archduke looked up at King Nuven calmly. The double-headed battle axe. That will be the weapon. King Nuven's pupils contracted. Everyone in the hall broke into boos and hisses. Ha! Archduke Trentida laughed at Archduke Olsius. Cunning little brat. Archduke Rockney huffed in disdain. Weakling. Battle axe, is it what I think it is? A thought appeared in Thales' mind and he turned around to ask. Wielding a double-headed battle axe requires enormous strength and patience. It can hack both ways, and is highly destructive. With a spike on top, it can also be used to stab the enemy. This weapon was once popular in the battles against the orcs, Nicholas replied calmly. But this cumbersome weapon is rarely used on battlefields these days. Most Northland axemen prefer the lighter single-blade battle axe. Smart choice. Poutre squinted as he shook his head. He is taking advantage of King Nuven's old age. Shortly after, the weapons were delivered. Thales stared at the two massive weapons being carried into the arena by guards. The axe was a weapon with thick handles made to be held by both hands. It was half the height of a grown man and had two crescent blades, each about the size of one's chest. The blades glistened with a ghastly glow. There were also miniature blades on top of the axes for stabbing. It was indeed a powerful and formidable weapon. Thales swallowed. This axe probably weighed twice his weight. He thought of the enormous battle axe used by Uraka's opponent in the battle at Broken Dragon Fortress. Nonetheless, the kingdom's wrath snatched said weapon from him and hacked him in the face in the end. Pofret peered at King Nuven, who was across him and gave a light chuckle. He grabbed the giant axe from the guard with one arm, weighing it in his hand. Then, with a jerk, the young Archduke hauled the weapon up. Pofret smiled, feeling pleased. He turned around and swung the giant axe into the air with loud, sharp swooshes. As if it was a very simple matter to do. Thales watched his easy and relaxed movements, gawking at him. This damn thing sure is a handful. Pofret placed the giant axe on his shoulder. He looked up and shot a glare at King Nuven, who stood before his weapon. Be careful not to sprain your back, your majesty. The king ignored him. He merely stretched his hand out and pressed it gently on the axe handle, giving it a few squeezes at certain places. He then took a deep breath, and held on to the axe handle with both hands. Thales frowned. His presumption was more or less the same as Pofret's. After all, King Nuven is already 70. Before Thales could finish his inner monologue, the old king clenched his teeth and lifted the giant axe steadily. He even threw the axe into the air. It took a 180-degree flip in the air before falling back into his grip. Thales gaped at the old king, who was apparently still pretty tough. Like Pofret, King Nuven carried the giant axe on his shoulder, which seemed like the standard posture while holding an axe. He heaved a long sigh as storms brewed in his wild eyes. You do not have to worry about me. When I was fighting orcs in the war, your father was still being breastfed by his mother. King Nuven smiled a demonic grin. Little sh*t. Pofret's expression darkened. Looks like our king is as impressive as ever, the bald Archduke Leko said and sighed. If I were him, I would have been, by that axe. It's too early for any conclusion. Archduke Trentida shook his head with a strange expression on his face. If something bad happens to our much revered king. Isn't that what you want? Archduke Rockney snapped at them brusquely. The damned king selection. Snubbed, Trentida looked away. Archduke Olsius was combing through his full beard, scowling as he did so. He was thinking about the airship duel of Black Sand region 12 years ago. As Thales was still agitated by the possibility of King Nuven's defeat, High Priestess Holm ambled to the center of the arena, capturing the attention of the room full of people. Everyone grew anxious all of a sudden. High Priestess Holm stood between the two opponents, and her bright eyes beneath the veil took a peek at each of them. She raised her right hand, pointing King Nuven. She announced with a clear and cold voice, "For vengeance, this man has called for a duel." King Nuven glared at his opponent coldly. The High Priestess raised her left arm, pointing at the young Pofret. "For prestige and glory, this man shall accept the challenge." Pofret exhaled with a somber expression. "In the name of the bright moon goddess, I shall serve as a witness." The High Priestess took a few steps back slowly and nimbly. Each step she took was followed by a verse. Blades and armor dance amid the shower of the silver moonglow. In the freshly spilled blood, the light of godly glory shines. Courage is a flame, incinerating noble souls. Death is anything but a way back to one's long-separated home. Both King Nuven and Archduke Pofret's facial expressions turned grim. They lifted their giant axes off their shoulders. King Nuven stooped down with his arms outstretched. His left hand glided down the axe handle and reached the part where the axe handle as well as the axe blade were joined. Meanwhile, Archduke Pofret positioned his weapon by his side, holding the axe blade as close to his cheek as possible. He maintained the best posture to perform a hack. They stared at each other with hostility. Thales squinted and saw every negative emotion one could possibly own in both of their eyes. The High Priestess retreated to one corner of the arena and took a deep breath. She then raised her arms and pointed them to the sky as if to make a final prayer. The audience held their breath. A second later, the High Priestess retracted her arms. She placed her hands on both shoulders, lowered her head, and said, "The duel will now begin." Chapter 149. Not even worth half a penny. The following second, Archduke Pofret's shadow moved without delay. He started his assault from the front. He bellowed as he swung his battle axe at King Nuven. Clank, asterisk. The two big axes clashed together without unnecessary movements. The blunt clanking of striking metal tortured the crowd's ears. Astonished, Thales watched the two players on the field. Pofret gritted his teeth as the blade of his battle axe was stuck at the top of King Nuven's axe. It slanted downwards between the edge of the blade and the tip of the sharp edge. Impulsive rookie, King Nuven leaned forward steadily. His left hand gripped the joint between the axe handle and blade, while his right clutched the far end of the handle like he was holding a gun. He used the axe to hold back Pofret's attack. The old king resisted the other party's attack and spoke in an icy voice, "If you had your weapon stuck like this on the battlefield, you would be dead by now." During their tangle, King Nuven used all his strength to push the other's battle axe away. "You know, this is not turning out to be a good idea, old man." Pofret took a hefty step back, claimed his battle axe, and moved around as he searched for an opportunity to strike again. "This is not a battlefield, this is a duel." The young Archduke circled the old king and shifted his footsteps. "There aren't a lot of white blade guards around you, to protect that honorable head of yours." Like a veteran warrior, King Nuven followed Pofret's movements and his blade remained targeted at the enemy. "It's just you and me now." While talking, Pofret's second strike came again. This time, he swung the battle axe in an open arc. He struck King Nuven's waist with a strong hack from the side. Clang, asterisk. The sound of metal rang once again. Just at the right moment, King Nuven turned the handle of his axe. His left hand was supporting his battle axe as he avoided Pofret's strike once more. "Yes, just you and me." King Nuven gritted his teeth as he deflected the blade of his enemy. He slowly gasped for breath. "This is much more exciting than being on the battlefield." Thales whispered in doubt, "Why do they so familiar with wielding battle axes?" "His Majesty is not a child who has never laid a hand on a weapon before." The Star Killer had a stern expression on his face as he explained sarcastically. As Extit's king, he once single-handedly resisted the onslaught of Northern Glacier OCS at the 38th century ground. The skull of the human slaughterer, Zyra Darkstorm, still hangs high in the 1st century ground to intimidate the Glacier Orcs. He also once broke through the Golden Passage and fractured the White Mountain Elves' line of defense to the west. The Purposeful Army and their prestigious heir managed to persuade Camus, the White Elves, and the Alliance of Freedom. The Star Killer had a glimmer in his eyes. 300 years ago, he was the first one to take Broken Dragon Fortress. As the Northern Monarch, he crossed the borders of Extit and Constellation. In terms of combat experience, he cannot be defeated by any of the seasoned warriors of the White Blade Guards. Poutre raised his brows as Thales stuck his tongue out. Back to the duel, Pofret raised his battle axe once again as both his and King Nuven's weapon clashed in the air. Clang, asterisk. Their blades collided, sending sparks flying. King Nuven seemed to be a little overwhelmed. He gritted his teeth and braced himself against the battle axe as his arm trembled slightly. Tired already, Pofret grabbed the opportunity to bellow when King Nuven took a breather. His arms suddenly began to tremble. "Old man." King Nuven could not take it and fell a step back. While the king was still adjusting his bearings, Pofret swung his axe again and started pursuing him in attack. Clang, asterisk. Once more, King Nuven resisted his enemy's violent assault. He had been passively defending from the very beginning. But this time, the enemy's assault did not end so simply. A force surged up Pofret's arms and his eyes burned like a crazy, murderous warrior. He bellowed and took another strike at the king's left leg. From his undulating view of the duel, Thales could see that Pofret was suddenly charged with a bright light. It constantly flashed, and was concentrated in his arms. The power of eradication. Nicholas watched as his own king met with danger. He remained calm as he briefly explained, the axe barrage style is practiced in Beacon Illumination City, giving birth to at least 3 types of powers of eradication. The old king snarled as he exhausted all his strength to retrieve the battle axe. He struck Pofret's axe away, sending sparks into the air. Clang, asterisk. The king continued to endure his opponent's axe. However, it was not the same as before. With this strike, the old king failed to lock down on his opponent's axe blade. Pofret had no intention of stopping either. Accompanying the frantic expression of its owner, the axe roared with the wind as it made a few loops in the air. Once again, Pofret targeted his assault at the king's head. Gasping for air, King Nuvan struggled to adjust his stance. He lifted the heavy handle of his axe and rested it by his side. He held back Pofret's assault forcibly. Clang, asterisk. A loud sound rang and Thales subconsciously raised his hands to cover his ears. With the blessing of the power of eradication, Pofret did not get his axe stuck like the previous time. He reacted swiftly as he turned his axe around. He instantly slipped past Nuvan's defenses. In the next moment, the young archduke pursed his lips and pushed with both hands, thrusting forward the spike on the axe. He was going to lunge at his enemy. In the face of his enemy's surprise attack, the overwhelmed King Nuvan did not have time to put down his heavy axe. He could only look on helplessly as the spike came towards his face. The spike moved closer until they pierced his left cheek. Arg, King Nuvan snarled in disdain. At that very moment, Thales felt his heart skip a beat. In the nick of time, King Nuvan turned to his side. Ah! The spike grazed the king's face, drawing blood this time, and it provoked a cry of exasperation from the hall. Brandishing a terrible scar that began from his cheekbones to his left ear, King Nuvan made a narrow escape from the deadly spike. Blood began to drip on the ground. The king clenched his jaw. He mustered all his strength to brandish his axe, forcing Pofret back in the process. This was also Nuvan's first counterattack. Pofret withdrew himself in 3 agile steps, escaping the king's axe and his offensive range as well. Like many of those in the hall, Thales could only exhale. He patted his chest in relief. Have you all forgotten one thing? Thales turned around and asked his peers with much concern. That old man, King Nuvan, is already 70 years old. As the king of Extit, a duel is something he has to experience. Nicholas opened his mouth slightly, but his gaze remained still. Age does not matter. Every Northland man has to serve in the army. There, he will receive harsh combat training. The same applies to every Extitian suzerain until they awaken the power of eradication, Poutre explained to Thales, who had mixed reactions. The state of the nation is as such because popular customs dictate it. God, I was so fortunate to be born in Constellation, not Extit. Thales rolled his eyes and shrugged helplessly. Upon hearing these words, the Star Killer laughed. Same old, same old. Welcome to Northland. Thales shook his head and cast his gaze on the arena. Poutre's expression changed as he looked at Thales' back. To be born in Constellation, is it considered lucky? Poutre sighed silently. You've spoken too soon, little prince. Ha ha ha. The young archduke looked at his bloody face in satisfaction. The king gasped for air as he clenched his teeth. How many rounds has it been, old man? Can't go on anymore. Nonsense, boy. King Nuvan put his axe on the floor and used his left hand to wipe the blood off his face. Not giving in, he said, that was just a warm-up. You're already 70. Pofret used his words to weaken the king's resolve and brew the next wave of assault. Your muscles have shrunk, even your powers of eradication have weakened, am I correct? Hee. King Nuvan took a deep breath and fiercely pursed his lips. Boy, how many battles have you fought? You dare say such words to me? Pofret began to laugh in a strange manner. Yes, I still remember, 12 years ago when my grandfather was still alive, you gathered the army of all the 6 archdukes as well as your own to visit the so-called nobility in the south of Constellation. In the midst of talking, Pofret lashed his axe out without warning. Clang, asterisk. The blade of his double-headed axe chiseled again into King Nuvan's axe. This time, the young archduke yelled and pressed forward with his whole body, confronting King Nuvan face to face. King Nuvan was pushed back a couple of steps before he was able to stand firmly. His face twitched. It was a struggle to hold the young archduke back and his arms continued trembling. You were strong, fierce and rich. Pofret gritted his teeth as he added more pressure on his blade, effortlessly suppressing the elderly king. You definitely did not look this ill and broken. Soon, the old king could not summon any more physical strength. He was being pushed and he slipped onto the ground. His weapon fell to the floor as well. Clank, asterisk. Everyone held their breath. Without any mercy, Pofret smashed his axe downwards. The old king rolled around slovenly as he evaded Pofret's axe, which violently struck the ground to his left. Clank, asterisk. The power was so immense that a hole was created on the stony ground. The hall burst in commotion. Damn it, Thales turned around in frustration. This is what I've been afraid of. Although his tightly furrowed brows had long betrayed his emotions, Nicholas coldly said, look. The battle has not reached its final moments. Nuven gasped for breath, but with a reaction speed way beyond his years, he quickly picked up his double-headed axe. The young Pofret also picked up his double-headed axe, which was carved into the ground. He seemed to be panting slightly as well, like he had exerted too much in that one blow earlier. Back then, my grandfather was clad in combat attire and armor. He stood next to you, out of breath just like a toothless tiger, venerable and disgraceful. There was a cold air about him as he scrutinized King Nuven's actions. Your forefathers were much better than you, King Nuven spat and got up to his feet. And you just never grew up, did you? Pofret's eyes started to twitch. The moment King Nuven got up, he attacked Pofret with a blow, using all the strength he could muster. Taking advantage of his unstable foothold, Pofret forced Nuven to kneel on one knee. Never grew up. Pofret laughed nastily as he brandished his double-headed axe. Once again, he pushed Nuven into retreating. The latter ended up squatting on the ground, unable to catch his breath. Beacon Illumination City was a docile, mature hound to you, right? A hound that would accept all your manipulation and orders at any time. Pofret chuckled as he struck the old king, who was attempting to get up again. Every time King Nuven tried to stand up, he was interrupted by Pofret's assault. The common elected king of Extit could not even get up to face his enemy. Before Constellation's broken dragon fortress, my grandfather's army could not restrain that damned sword of reversing light. The defenses of Beacon Illumination City were crippled. I still remember you whispering to my grandfather, you're old now. Is Beacon Illumination City old too? Pofret's tone was cold as he regained the immense energy he lost from brandishing the axe. The next day, my grandfather retired and my father succeeded the role of Archduke of Beacon Illumination City. At an absolute disadvantage, King Nuven just knelt on the ground and carelessly said, what? Don't tell me you wanted to betray Dragon Cloud City because of that. As he spoke, the old king swung his axe at Pofret's leg. The three southern archdukes were cruel and untamed. Pofret simply took a step back and avoided the axe. Looking at the fallen King Nuven, he continued, they delayed in restocking military supplies and were slow in their movements. Hence, the burden of the Constellation War was piled on Beacon Illumination City's shoulders. Troop supplies, military expenses, reinforcements, death squads and even military prostitutes. Don't you think something's not quite right there? Pofret gritted his teeth. Those were your assigned responsibilities as well as the king's orders. King Nuven's eyes were terrifying as he shouted in anger. Pofret mercilessly struck him yet again and King Nuven went rolling across the ground. The exhausted Nuven could not completely restrain his opponent at this point. The blade of Pofret's axe grazed his left shoulder, successively drawing more blood. This is bad, Thales secretly thought. This feels really bad. Screw your orders. To take down that damn broken dragon fortress, how many soldiers did we have to sacrifice? More than half among them were citizens of Beacon Illumination City. The young Archduke yelled. I had to witness the injured troops retreat, look at their numb expressions, and listen to their laments about going home. But the next day, they were once again dispatched in waves like targets in a battle to exhaust the fortress, bows, arrows, kerosene bombs, battering rams, boulders, mystic guns and soldiers. They went there just to throw away their lives. Ferocity burned from his eyes as he struck his own chest. On the other hand, the elite troops and generals of Dragon Cloud City were singing and laughing joyously, enjoying the best food and women. They even had the privilege of attacking the city only at the easiest, most crucial moment. After much fear and trepidation, my father succeeded the position of Archduke. Facing you, what else could he have done? Only more insane. Magnanimous disregard towards our soldiers followed. We sent them to the fortress, to their deaths. All in exchange for your trust. King Nuven grabbed the handle of his axe to block yet another attack from his opponent. He subsequently fell on his stomach and panted unceasingly. Pofret started circling King Nuven. To reduce the burden of holding the double-headed axe, he conveniently rotated it between his left and right hands. To my surprise, you just sat there in the camp. Under the protection of the White Blade Guards, you valiantly questioned my forefathers. Why was Beacon Illumination City unable to stop Horus Jadastar? Why were we unable to stop that damned murderous dictator of Constellation? Why were we unable to stop the most elite, insane royal guards he brought from Constellation's capital? Horus Jadastar. Thales' heart skipped a beat. He recalled the last story regarding the sword of reversing light that Tolja of Black Sand region told him. He turned around to look at Futre and Nicholas. The former remained speechless, while the latter pursed his lips with an unchanging expression on his face. You speak a lot of nonsense indeed. King Nuven wiped the blood on his left arm on his robe as he did not want it to affect his grip on the axe. He raised his head, revealing vicious eyes. On the battlefield, the one who talks the most nonsense dies the fastest. His reply was Pofret's unrelenting strike. Clang, asterisk. King Nuven trembled as he exposed the trajectory of his blade. He had descended into an absolute downfall. Screw you, Nuven Walton, Pofret spat with fury plastered across his face. Are you even worthy of being the conqueror of Broken Dragon Fortress? King Nuven got up and folded himself in a semi-kneeling position. He grasped his double-headed axe and looked at Pofret as if he was devising the most critical counterattack. Yet again, Pofret unrelentingly struck his axe against Nuven's axe handle. Clank, asterisk. King Nuven strenuously resisted his opponent's vigor as their two terrifying weapons hovered above in a deadlock. A piece of paper called the Fortress Treaty was all you needed for everyone to pack up and go home. As for the rest of the Archdukes, you even had the initiative to comfort and explain things to them. But for us, for Beacon Illumination City, no land, no benefits and no rewards are comfort. Just the wave of a hand and we were dismissed. Pofret gritted his teeth as he got to the verge of insanity. I personally handed your grandfather and your family the position of the Archduke of Beacon Illumination City because I trusted him. King Nuven clenched his jaw in fury. I was not in the least concerned because they were my best right-hand men. Bullshit, trust, that's not even worth half a penny. Pofret snarled. At the fortress, within Constellation territory lies the buried bodies of Beacon Illumination City soldiers. Go tell them that yourself if you have the guts. Right-hand men, why didn't you send the people of Dragon Cloud City to their deaths then? However, in the next moment, there was a flash in the eyes of the old king, who was seemingly finished. Additionally, the muscles in both his arms began to swell up. From the unique view granted to Thales by the wave of fluctuations, the old king's arms suddenly erupted in dazzling rays. Thales knew that this was King Nuven's power of eradication. It had rushed up his arms at that very instant. Chapter 150 The beloved former king, Nuven. Pofret's expression froze and his pupils contracted. King Nuven's arms swelled up as he unleashed his power of eradication. Its explosiveness pushed his great axe sideways. Pofret grabbed his own axe desperately, staring at the old king in disbelief. King Nuven's movements became quick and powerful in an instant. He let go of the great axe in his hand and shot towards Pofret with hawk-like focus. Using his right elbow, the old king struck a firm blow on Pofret's chest. Bash. Caught off guard, Pofret whimpered in pain as he took a step back. Clank. Both greataxes rolled onto the ground. In the hall, the moods of the spectators were instantly stirred up again. Thales could not take his eyes off them and even forgot to breathe at one point. The king's counterattack, finally. Free from the constraints of the great axe, King Nuven's movements became as fast as lightning. He did not stop after the initial attack with his elbow, instead he steadily clung on to his right arm. His feet kept moving, and with a terrifying momentum, he swung his right shoulder to cast a blow on Pofret's chest. Pofret momentarily lost his balance because of this. The young Archduke felt distress in his chest as he painfully gritted his teeth and continued to retreat. Beautiful, Marquis Shiles clicked his tongue in praise. This is indeed an instant twist of fate. King Nuven revealed a ferocious look and stepped forward. Whoosh! With his right hand formed into a fist, King Nuven swung it violently into the air, bringing about the sound of the wind. Too much nonsense. Never results in any good. Accompanying the king's deep growl, a heavy punch landed on Pofret's belly. More punches followed and the muffled sounds of every punch echoed in everyone's ears. Many of the archdukes began to frown. He really doesn't resemble a 70-year-old man right now. Trentida watched the king's counterattack in disbelief. Do not underestimate him. Archduke Olsius looked grave. He is, after all, the guardian of Glacier's defense. He fought countless life or death battles with the terrifying orcs. Pofret was hunched over, his face expressing deep pain. He huddled himself into a ball and it looked like he was unable to stomach the strength of the previous blow. Shortly after, King Nuven raised his left fist. His complexion was calm, yet overflowing with anger. Beacon Illumination City, unfairness. King Nuven looked like a lion who had just caught its prey. He stared at the young opponent before him with a ruthless gaze. Based on these ridiculous reasons. You killed Mariah. The next moment, the king struck again with his left fist. By virtue of the terrifying force brought upon by the power of eradication, he struck Pofret on his left chest, just right above the heart. Boff. There was a terrifying blunt sound. With that punch, Pofret's body swayed violently, like weightless leaves floating in the water. King Nuven observed his trembling opponent as he spat, coward. Thales could finally let go of the anxiety that was suspended in his heart. Phew, that gave me a shock. At this very moment. Wait a minute, something's not right. Nicholas was alarmed. King Nuven's face changed drastically after that final punch. A second later, Pofret yelled as he raised his head, held his chest up and straightened his crouched body. He looked extremely aggressive. The crowd could finally clearly see how the duel was progressing. King Nuven's punch towards Pofret's chest was firmly grasped in the Archduke's hand. The punch did not create an impact. It chilled Thales' heart. In the next instance, Pofred grabbed King Nuven's fist with his left hand. He jerked back all of a sudden and with a thunderous effort, pulled King Nuven towards him. He crossed his right elbow and directed it at King Nuven's face. Bash! Pofred struck the old king's head heavily with his elbow. A terrifying muffled sound echoed in the hall. But this time, the two opponents exchanged roles in offense and defense. King Nuven seemed to be dazed and stunned by the vicious blow from Pofred's elbow. He swayed and fell backwards. Thud! King Nuven fell to the ground, his head firmly striking a stone brick. A few screams erupted from the crowd of spectators. Thales stared blankly at the twist in dynamics of the duel. "I've waited a long time for that, Your Majesty." Pofred chuckled. He rubbed his chest, which endured the huge blow earlier. His words were chilling. It was hard work, saying so much nonsense just to get you to take the bait. King Nuven shook his head strenuously. It looked like he had lost his vision and sense of direction. Whenever the enemy has the advantage, you always use brutal counterattacks, playing to your strengths and striking the enemy with one fell swoop. Am I right, Your Majesty? The young Archduke furiously raised his leg and kicked King Nuven in the chest. As the audience members held their breath, he knocked him to the ground again. King Nuven trembled. He dragged his old body and tried to stand up again. But the blow was apparently too heavy. It was either that or he had expended too much energy. The old king actually could not get up. "My grandfather always told me stories about you. From your battle habits to your physicality and pace." Archduke Pofred gasped for breath and revealed a vengeful smile. "My grandfather, do you remember him?" King Nuven panted painfully. He flipped over and tried to retrieve his great axe. But Pofred was faster than the king. He stepped on the two axes before the king could reach it. After that, the Archduke raised his leg and consecutively kicked King Nuven to the ground again. The mouths of those watching hung open in shock. Although it was half expected, now that it has really happened. "As a child, my grandfather always said, we, in Extat, have a generous and just king. He described how you and Archduke Stustel clinked glasses at the sentry territory camp." The somber Pofred picked up the great axe by his legs. "But what did I witness instead? I saw two generations of Beacon Illumination City Archdukes in a panic and frightened state. They lived like dogs to flatter and obey you." On his way back to his hometown, my grandfather passed away from depression. My father feared for his life. He looked miserable every day as he tried to conform in exchange for Dragon Cloud City's support. Even when he and his troops were retreating, he had to prepare prostitutes for the lot of you. Pofred growled reluctantly as he looked at the king. "They suffered from humiliation, fear and pain under your shadow." The young Archduke then came striking with his axe. King Nuven gasped for breath. He was forced to give up his weapon as he rolled away from Pofred's attack. Boom! The axe slammed into the ground and bits of stone flew everywhere amid the loud bang. Pofred exhaled and panted for about 2 seconds. As he lifted his great axe, he walked towards the already weaponless and breathless King Nuven with a malicious look in his eyes. Many in the Hall of Heroes had their fists clenched tight. Oh no, the crystal drop ore contract with Dragon Cloud City. Marquis Shiles gave himself a painful slap. Poutre squinted his eyes. He appeared to be plotting something in his mind. Thales was speechless and his mood was heavy. He really just started to consider how things would be post King Nuven's death. Shiles was only worried about his contract. But what he really had to worry about was his scant life. Pofred's footsteps reverberated with deadly aura. Step by step, he walked towards the king. "Hiya," Archduke Lecco sighed. "Is this the end?" Archduke Rockney pursed his lips tightly. Olsius had a complex look on his face, whereas Trendita rolled his eyes in deep thought. Nobody responded to Lecco. To everyone's surprise, King Nuven suddenly began to laugh. "Ha ha ha, I've figured it out." King Nuven panted and raised his head in laughter. "Your father's death, you were behind it, right?" The emotion in Pofred's eyes faltered. The sudden death of the former Archduke of Beacon Illumination City. In an instant, the young Archduke had a rabid look to him. Something had stirred up his deepest past. The secret room has had its doubts for the longest time. Your father's death was too fishy. He suddenly fell to an ailment at the prime of his life. Weaponless, the old king gritted his teeth as he mustered everything he had to get up. He stared tenaciously at the Archduke. "It was you, Concret Pofred." King Nuven's words cut like a knife in Pofred's heart. His words cut through the hall as the spectators also quivered in fear. It was his favorite son, his successor all along. "You murdered your own father, did you not?" Nuven was serious and he had a complicated look in his eyes. Pofred's axe-wielding hands started trembling. His face contorted as his teeth started chattering. "No." Pofred's face turned white, his lips trembled and he subconsciously raised his great axe. "I did not." The young Archduke took a deep breath. "I did not." He raised his head abruptly and his pupils were blanketed in vengeance as he stared at King Nuven. "I did not kill him." As he bellowed, the young Archduke snatched his axe and struck the king with it. Boom. King Nuvan evaded this fatal blow sloppily. As he retreated, he fell onto the ground again. Pofret's power of eradication once again enhanced his speed and the power in his arms. The Archduke bellowed and swung the axe backwards. He frantically raised the axe with both hands, and he directed the sharp weapon at the fallen King Nuvan, striking him. Nervous and frightened, everyone watched on as King Nuvan snarled. He extended both arms and actually grabbed the handle of the oncoming axe. The old king dangerously obstructed the axe blade on his chest. A collective gasp was heard coming from the hall. Dumbstruck, Thales watched as the king was forced into despair. Father unexpectedly got injured. It was very bad, very severe, Pofred murmured with a sorrowful expression. I did not do anything. I only had him go into a deep slumber. He wasn't living in good fortune anyway. From then on, there were no more restlessness, no more fear, and no more disturbances. The Archduke, who was wrestling with King Nuvan, did not cease in his attacks. With his utmost strength, he pushed his axe blade towards the king. He roared frantically, there will be no more nightmares brought upon by Dragon Cloud City. Unwavered, King Nuvan held on to the handle of his axe, groaning painfully. However, his face was flushed and the trembling of his shoulders grew worse. Pofred composed himself as his gaze condensed into a firm numbness. From that moment, I bore all of Beacon Illumination City's humiliation and pain. I'm going to end it. King Nuvan's old face twisted in pain and restraint as he watched the axe nearing his chest. The old king was not willing to reveal any trace of weakness. His spirit was strong, but his flesh was weak. Haha, even if you kill me, you're still a coward. Pofred trembled. He raised his head in due time. He then looked at King Nuvan and squinted his eyes slowly. That's right. Pofred strengthened his arm unrelentlessly, causing the old king to groan again. It's all our fault, we're too cowardly. Pofred's biceps were extremely extreme, while his eyes burned with indignance. But look at the three archdukes of the south, not a single one of them conformed. Trendita of Reformation Tower always concealed his opposition with outward devotion, he skimps on the job. Olsius of Prestige Orchid Region, who has special status bestowed upon him by Rikaru, pays no attention to you. Lampod of Black Sand Region is even more so a thorn in your side. The whole thing wrenched the hearts of the crowd, especially the archdukes whose names were mentioned. They started to falter. Nonetheless, they received respect. Pofred gritted his teeth as he spat these words at the weakening king. You treated them as worthy opponents, while Beacon Illumination City's Pofrets lived under the dragon's shadow. We were like pitiful dogs and weak, gullible objects. Why? Because 2 generations of our archdukes were both cowards. King Nuvan grew increasingly exhausted against the young man's vigor. The duel of life and death was finally reaching its juncture. The blade of the axe started to pierce into the king's chest. Because of this, you just put yourself in Lampard's hands. King Nuvan stammered. His eyes were now bloodshot. Of course it's not just that. Pofret's face became cold again. But why would I tell you? Nuvan unwillingly howled. When you reach Hell's River, please wish my forefathers well, the young archduke said without any mercy. Beloved former king. King Nuvan. King Nuvan roared in pain and sorrow. Pofret's pupils contracted, immense power surged as he struck him with great violence. Thwump. The sharp end of the axe pierced straight into the old king's chest. King Nuvan stared intently at Archduke Pofred in front of him. It seemed as though he could not believe what was happening before his eyes. Blood stained the king's robe. Thales gradually lowered his head as he screwed his eyes shut. Shortly after, a dead silence flooded the hall.